Chapter 546. He and the Goblin Cabbie put on a two-man show to stabilize the atmosphere in the Goblin Plain. With Tygol's secret cooperation and the Goblin royal family's compromise, there was no need to worry that there would be no audience for this show. More importantly, after experiencing so many twists and turns and suffering, the goblins at the bottom began to yearn for peace. In the name of the non-violent, non-cooperation plan, Cabbie even called on the goblins at the bottom to take the initiative to cooperate with the invaders to avoid bringing more suffering to his goblin companions. Thus, before the flames of resistance against the invaders could even be ignited, it was completely doused by this show. There was no longer any soil left for the flames of war. Goblins were very forgetful. They quickly forgot about the huge troubles and damage that the evil sorcerers had caused to the Goblin Plain. Instead, they obediently waited before the invaders, becoming their stewards and accomplices in ruling and managing the Goblin Plain. Grimm had successfully obtained a large number of free laborers with a mechanical civilization. Undoubtedly, he had also obtained a well-developed, low-magic world with slightly biased resources. Compared to the sorcerer world, the Goblin Plain was definitely not rich in resources. Due to the thin magical energy in the plane, the corresponding magical creatures, magic gems, and materials were also quite rare. However, in contrast to these, the Goblin Plain could be said to be rich in metal mines. Most of these metal mines were buried deep in the ground, and there were very few magic gems accompanying them. For most wizards, it was a barren land with few resources. However, Grimm had a different view on this. On many levels, Grimm actually approved of Gazruvi's development strategy. There was a limit to the mechanical civilization's development. Once the limit was reached, it would be the end of the mechanical civilization's development, and it would be extremely difficult to take another step forward. The biggest shackle that limited the mechanical civilization was the energy crisis. If the mechanical civilization wanted to develop, it needed a source of energy that could support the entire engineering system. In the past, the goblins used the rare magic stones in the plain and high combustion rate anthracite to support the steam civilization. The reason why the logging robots and magic armors were so large was not to show off the goblins' superb skills, but to store more coal and magic stones. If the magic machinery was too small, the energy it carried would not be enough to support it for a long time. However, things like coal and magic stones were low-level energy sources that were difficult to regenerate, and the energy conversion rate was so low that it made people's hair stand on end. The gnomes wouldn't even be able to defend their own plane with this low-end energy source, much less leave the plane and search for new energy sources in a new world. To be honest, Gazruvi was the one with the most foresight and adventurous spirit among the goblin engineers. It was precisely because it saw that the gnome mechanical civilization's development had reached its limit. In order to find a way out for all the gnomes, it hooked up with many high-level existences, hoping to obtain the gnomes' future development direction from them. It had to be said that the space furnace that Gazruvi had invented by combining the specialties of the various dimensions was the most epic-making invention in the history of the goblin dimension that was worth celebrating. Its appearance forcefully pushed the goblin civilization into the age of mana. From now on, even the gnomes, who had no connection to magic, could control and use mana as they pleased. It was a pity that if Gazruvi's ambition was not so great, and if he had a little more dedication, the subsequent events would not have developed to this state. It had created the Age of Mana with its own hands, but the critical moment when the Goblin Empire was being reborn, Gazruvi's life had come to an end. It was not willing to give up. It did not want to give up. It hoped that it could personally push and witness the flourishing of the Goblin civilization, thus becoming a powerful force in the multiverse that everyone would respect. In order to extend its life, it had secretly implemented the Immortality Project. The reason it had brought in external forces was to use them as a sacrifice for its Immortality Project. It was a pity that the strength of the outsiders far exceeded its imagination, and the power in its hands was not enough to control and command them as it pleased. Thus, the final outcome was that the evil wizard had turned on it, and it was buried in the ruined Steel City along with the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon and the many Draconid warriors. The method Gazruvi chose was too impatient, and the methods he used were too violent. However, the direction he chose was not wrong. To put it bluntly, he was actually the wisest and most forward-looking goblin master and sage in the entire Goblin Plain. However, a loser would always be a loser. When he disappeared with that earth-shattering explosion, the world he left behind became a stage for Grimm to display his talents to the fullest. Grimm was not a prodigal son who did not use the good stuff. Since the goblins were already in his pocket, the most important thing was to push them into the Age of Mana as soon as possible. If he had a huge army of magic weapons under his command, would it be difficult for him to conquer a new plane of existence? In the sorcerer world, in order to create a qualified battle sorcerer, other than spending a large amount of resources, the long apprenticeship period was also a necessary development process. In the Goblin Empire that had entered the Age of Mana, to create a magic machine with the power of a sorcerer, they only needed suitable metal resources in a quarter of an hour. As long as there was no shortage of metal resources, and as long as the spatial furnace was still operating, magic machines would continuously flow down the assembly line and become a terrifying magic machine army that would fight for Grimm everywhere. Grimm would fulfill Gazruvi's dreams that were still on the blueprints. However, their appearance must serve Grimm's dreams, and that was the only prerequisite. Sky Patrol ships, Goblin puppet dragons, Goblin mortars, Goblin jumper cables, Goblin dragon spears, spatial rippers, Thor, titans. These things would soon no longer be dreams, but reality. At that time, under Grimm's leadership, the Goblin Magic Machine Army would become a terrifying force that could sweep across the multiverse. Therefore, after stabilizing the Goblin Plane, Grimm was working hard on two things. The first was to create a stable teleportation system and tie the Goblin Plane more firmly to his chariot. The second was to carry out a rescue operation in the Steel City that had been destroyed by the explosion. This was also the most important point that Grimm emphasized. It could not be helped. Almost 80% of the Curus metal that had been excavated from the Goblin Plain had been transported to the Steel City by Gazruvi. If Grimm wanted to build a spatial furnace on a large scale, he had to dig out the buried Curus metal from deep underground. Moreover, Gazruvi had once built a plain door for the Draconians, and it had also been buried underground. Although it had experienced such a terrifying explosion, it was impossible for these things to remain undamaged. However, if they were excavated in time, even if it was just a small fragment, Grimm would be able to obtain some unexpected knowledge from another world. In particular, this kind of plain door that could only be used by low-level goblins was a high-quality item that Grimm dreamed of. With it, Grimm's faction would have a closer connection with the Goblin Plane, and it would also be easier for Grimm to control the goblins. Moreover, it was still unknown whether the terrifying explosion had killed the Grade 3 Brain Colossus Gazruvi and the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon arms. Therefore, Grimm could only feel at ease if he investigated, developed, and grasped the situation there as soon as possible. After the explosion, the entire mountain range was covered in clouds of radiation that spanned thousands of kilometers and was hundreds of meters tall. Ordinary goblins would wither and die in less than half a minute after entering the clouds. Therefore, if he wanted to investigate the situation underground, he had to clear these clouds of radiation. Of course, the goblins were unfamiliar with these things that were related to void energy, but it was not a problem for Magi, who had rich experience surviving in the outer regions. Grimm returned to the Magus world and purchased a type of giant deer grass from the Silver Alliance. He squeezed out the juice from within and used it with a spell to create rain in the sky above the Steel City. With the washing of the strange rain, the clouds of radiation that had gathered for a long time finally began to fade and disappear. In the end, a clear area of over 100 kilometers was dug out from the thick sea of gray clouds. Thus, the goblins used the remaining giant floating ship to transport a large amount of materials, drilling machines, and other construction equipment to the clear area and build a temporary excavation camp there. Then, The goblins continuously dug downwards day and night, hoping to create a hole that would lead to the inside of the dilapidated steel city. The magus representative that Grimm had stationed here was the insect Lich Bliss. As for the other magi, apart from the poison centipede, Ender, and Merrill, who had left behind to protect the teleportation device, the rest had all returned to the magus world. Grimm did not know how large the cost of teleportation was unless he had experienced it himself. The Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda had to spend 12,000 magic crystals to teleport a magus. For a level 2 magus like Grimm, a single teleportation would cost 30,000 magic crystals. If the goblins did not find a free and powerful energy source for the teleportation device, just the cost of teleporting a magus would cause Grimm, who had just accumulated some wealth, to go bankrupt. Of course, Alice's Tower of Destiny could have helped Grimm share some of the costs, but Grimm's chauvinism had gotten the better of him, and he had gritted his teeth and refused. Grimm was well aware of Alice's difficulties. She seemed to have a large family and business, and had the support of the Tower of Destiny that had accumulated over 1,000 years, but was not easy for her either. After all, she had a large group of apprentices waiting to be fed, and her Tower of Destiny also had a dozen magical elves that ate the most resources, squeezing left and right. As a leader of the Witches of Destiny, Alice's life was not much better than Grimm's. Chapter 547. The excavation went smoothly. With the support of the Goblin royal family, the camp was well prepared with food and resources. There were also hundreds of boxes of magical batteries that were used as energy sources, enough to run more than 200 construction machines continuously for a month. More than 30 drilling machines used their high-speed rotating drills to drill a big hole in the ground mixed with sand and gravel, and then disappeared from everyone's sight. If they were lucky, they could drill over 100 meters underground in one go. But when they reached there was a very high probability that they would hit the outer wall of a metal building or directly hit a huge piece of rock that was as large as a hill. Either way, it was not a good thing for the weak drilling machines. Either the machine would be destroyed or the drill would go on strike. They could only stay where they were and wait for help from above. Of course, there were also those who were lucky enough to find a zigzagging underground space amidst the countless boulders, stone statue fragments, and parts of the metal building. Thus, as they continued to clear the ground, the general situation of the underground space became clear. The original steel capital was built on the peak of a towering mountain. Close to 60% of the mountain was hollowed out and transformed into underground tunnels, caverns, and secret rooms of all sizes. In order to increase their sturdiness, the goblins had laid down a large number of metal tunnels and secret chambers that were made entirely of metal components when excavating this underground space. Following the explosion, all of the underground tunnels were broken into countless pieces, and the metal chambers were twisted and deformed, moving in different directions. Later, the underground space collapsed, and the mountain above, along with most of the buildings in the steel capital, collapsed. Then, they were buried under hundreds of millions of meters of soil and shattered rocks. To be honest, if they wanted to dig out the former steel capital from the depths of the earth, they would have to find the things that were originally in the underground space. The difficulty was no less than digging out the entire mountain range that spanned over 100 miles. The amount of work required was so great that it left one speechless. But since it was a project that Grimm pushed for, the rich and overbearing Goblin royal family could only grit their teeth and accept it, investing most of the forces under their control into it. There were more than 70,000 goblins stationed in the goblin camp within the clear zone. Hundreds of construction machines cleared the ground day and night, pushing large amounts of junk and debris further away. In just 5 days, they had already dug 150 meters into the ground and cleared out tens of thousands of tons of gravel and metal fragments. And in the center of the goblin camp, there was a small tent that stood alone. Not a single goblin dared to approach within 100 meters of it. Only when the excavation team discovered a strange object that they had never seen before would they send someone to invite the supervisor, Lord Bliss. Even when he went out, he would hide himself in a thick black robe, not revealing the slightest bit of skin. In the huge camp, apart from a few goblin commanders who knew his true identity, the rest of the goblins were completely clueless. Bliss once again returned from the Goblin Engineering Command and sat cross-legged on his carpet. There was a fist-sized crystal ball in front of him, and there was a faint red glow. Bliss extended his strange right hand, covered in a black carapace, and pressed it onto the crystal ball. In the next second, a familiar spiritual consciousness flowed into his mind. Bliss, how are the goblins? It was Grim, who was far away in the wizard world. With the teleportation device and the blazing flame wizard's pagoda, the connection between the two planes was no longer a problem. Master, they've dug another 17 meters underground today. However, they had encountered the remains of a giant stone statue and were trying to pull it out after blasting it apart. Furthermore, they had also discovered a metal building roof that stretched for almost 3 kilometers, and they should be able to find the main body of the Steel City after its explosion soon. When the time comes, we might have some interesting discoveries. After listening to Blitz's report, Grim paused for a moment before asking, "What did you find on your side?" With the cunning and suspicious nature of the wizards, how could they pin their hopes on the goblins? That was why Grim had stationed Bliss here. One reason was to monitor the goblins' progress, and the other was to borrow the special abilities of the insect lich to search for treasures underground. My little darlings are about to reach 500 meters underground. Yesterday, we discovered a few metal tunnels. Today, we found an underground warehouse, but it's filled with ordinary resources. At this rate, we'll need another 3 or 4 days to reach a depth of 1,000 meters. Hearing this answer, Grim nodded in satisfaction, then transmitted, "The closer you get to the explosion, the more careful you have to be. Apart from the broken space in the soil, you also have to be careful of the enemy. I have a feeling that they're not completely dead yet. Once you discover any signs of life, inform me immediately, and I'll rush over as soon as possible." The two conversed softly for a while, and only cut off the long-distance communication after confirming that they had not missed anything. Bliss only retracted his right hand after the red glow and the crystal ball had completely dissipated and sat stiffly on the ground. Of course, he did not fall asleep, nor did he meditate. Instead, he immersed his consciousness into the thorn scorpion beneath the thick soil. In the dark soil 573 meters below Bliss, a thorn scorpion the size of a wash basin was using its strange instincts to push away the soil and was working hard to dig downwards. Under the scanning of its strange compound eyes, the soil in front of it was not completely dark. There were also countless strange substances mixed within. This included green tree branches that had not completely rotted, metal fragments that flickered with fluorescent energy, the remains of goblins, oddly shaped broken rocks, and many other broken substances that could not be identified. The 13 thorn scorpions didn't gather together and instead spread out on their own, searching through the loose earth and debris in search of a hidden passage that led downwards. Although the original underground passage was mostly destroyed, there were still some remnants. As long as they could find them, not only would it be easy to locate them, but they could also track down some valuable targets. However, when this stinger scorpion continuously dug through the earth, it suddenly stopped its movements, starting to fully sense a strange vibration that originated from the depths of the earth. The source of the vibration was not far, only a few dozen meters away. And from the amplitude and frequency of the vibration, it seemed as if something was secretly digging upwards, and its speed was not slow. This unexpected discovery immediately attracted the attention of Bliss, who was on the surface. Under his remote control, the 13 thorn scorpions began to approach the source of the vibration from various angles. Before reporting to Grim, he felt that he had to find out the truth about the source of the vibration. With a target, the digging speed would be much faster. When they were only 10 meters away from the source of the vibration, under Bliss's command, the rest of the thorn scorpions stopped digging and went into hiding mode. Only one thorn scorpion continued to move forward carefully. Just as the thorn scorpion was only a meter away from the source of the vibration, A strange black claw penetrated the thick soil and grabbed it. Shortly after, the soil exploded and a faint light appeared. In a narrow cave that could only accommodate one person, two tall figures, one fat and one skinny, were squeezed inside. The one that was holding the thorn scorpion was the sturdier one. Grabbing the thorn scorpion and shaking it, the tall figure flung off the mud and dirt on its body. Without hesitation, the tall figure opened its mouth and stuffed the thorn scorpion into its mouth. The thorn scorpion's tough, alloy-like shell was completely useless in the tall figure's mouth. Following a burst of strange kacha-kacha sounds, the insect's shell ruptured and insect blood splashed everywhere. The stinger scorpion was actually swallowed whole. The insect Lich Bliss suddenly let out a sharp hiss, feeling a sharp pain in his head. He had a feeling that the other party had not only swallowed the thorn scorpion, but also the strand of mental strength that he had attached to the thorn scorpion. Damn it, it's him. Bliss endured the pain and opened the communication crystal. When Grimm received the news, he was actually dealing with a matter at hand. After a long period of planning and control, he finally had some progress on the big matter that he had been plotting for a long time. The fish had taken the bait. Lester? Vic, the one who had left behind the Origin blood and infected Mary into a foreign vampire, had finally reappeared after lying low for 70 years. He had left the Castle of Blood in the Cadastran region and began to frequently interfere with the local affairs of the Vic family, spending his days at noble banquets and lustful salons. This sounded like good news. But along with the good news came a huge piece of bad news. Unfortunately, that Lester, Vic had successfully advanced to become a Grade 2 vampire. Without a doubt, his status in the Vic clan had risen to the same level as several of the clan elders. Even with Grimm's strength as a Grade 2 fire wizard, and having advanced a few years earlier than Lester, it would not be easy to capture him. If he was not careful, even Grimm might fall at his hands. After all, the difficulty of dealing with vampire wizards was well known even in the scattered Talon region. But for Mary's future development, it was more important to help her undergo blood transfusion rebirth as soon as possible. Just as Grimm was silently planning a plan to capture the Grade 2 vampire wizard, the insect Lich Bliss, who was far away in the Goblin Plain, suddenly sent him a piece of shocking news. Chapter 548. After seeing the image Bliss sent back, Grimm was 80% sure that the tall figure was the Thunder Dragon Arms, who had gone missing in the explosion. It was obvious that in order to escape, Arms had transformed into a human form again, using this method to reduce the difficulty of the excavation. Through the blurry image, Grimm could vaguely see that the humanoid Thunder Dragon Arms seemed to have brought its own dry rations. The skinny figure behind Arms looked very familiar to Grimm, as if it was someone he knew. But according to Grimm's memories, it shouldn't be that skinny. But looking at the skeletal arms and legs of the figure, Grimm could vaguely guess what was going on. It had been more than 20 days since the explosion. Even a Grade 3 Thunder Dragon would have a hard time surviving in the underground without food or water. Moreover, when the explosion occurred, the Thunder Dragon was so close to the spatial furnace. It was impossible for it to escape unscathed. If it hadn't used its dragon blood barrier to resist the terrible void storm, it would have died a long time ago. Although he had survived, he was riddled with scars and his stamina was exhausted. That was why the Thunder Dragon Arms was buried under billions of tons of solid mud and rocks. In order to save himself, the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon Arms had no choice but to capture his Tier 2 Dragon Man Zacha, feeding on the latter's flesh and blood, barely hanging on until now. Although the flesh and blood provided it with a certain amount of stamina and life force, it couldn't heal its serious injuries. But that wasn't a problem for it. As long as it had enough mana, the extraordinary physique of the dragon race could heal any physical injuries. Unfortunately, the Goblin Plain was a small plain with scarce resources and mana. The thin aura of mana was so torturous that it wanted to cry. After 20 days, not only did it not recover its mana, it even became weaker due to the hard work and monotonous diet. Without the nourishment of lightning, the injuries on Arm's body began to worsen, to the point where its body was about to collapse. Even so, Arms did not give up hope of survival. Step by step, it moved towards the surface with its flesh and blood. Wherever it passed, all the lizards, ants, snakes, flies, and other living creatures were unable to escape its hunt, and they became the condiments that supported it to continue. Unfortunately, Bliss Stinger Scorpion ended up in the Thunder Dragon's stomach because of this. The Type 3 Thunder Dragon was still 612 meters from the surface, which meant that in such a cruel environment, it had actually managed to dig 400 meters from the ground with its steel-like claws. This distance didn't sound too far, but it was 1,000 meters underground. In that area, a large number of metal tunnels and collapsed metal buildings were stacked on top of each other. It was extremely difficult to dig an upward passage from these metal mountains. Even the soil, which was usually as soft as slag, would be as dense and hard as steel under the pressure of billions of tons of weight. In all honesty, Grimm was completely surprised that Lightning Dragon Arms was able to accomplish this. In Grimm's expectations, he thought that these annoying bastards would use some special terrain to survive underground and wait for their deaths. It did not cross his mind that there would be a fellow who was so strong that he could dig it out with his bare hands and just the strength of his physical body. If Grimm hadn't discovered it, it would have been able to escape with its life if Arms had been given another 7 or 8 days of time. Of course, that was if its injuries didn't worsen. But now that Grimm had discovered it, the Thunder Dragon Arms escape route was destined to be cut off. Left with no other choice, Grimm sent Mary to keep Lester busy while he returned to the Goblin Plain and brought Ender with him to the Goblin camp. In just 2 days, the Thunder Dragon Arms had dug another 170 meters upwards. As if it had sensed the strong tremors coming from above, Arms stopped digging after a short pause. Instead, it started digging horizontally, as if it was trying to avoid the unknown forces above. After losing one of its scorpions, Bliss became extremely cautious. He sent 2 scorpions to follow behind the Thunder Dragon, and they quickly moved underground along the tunnel. The remaining 10 scorpions were scattered around the Thunder Dragon, and based on the movements it made when it dug, they didn't get any closer. If the Thunder Dragon was still in its normal state, the scorpions would not be able to escape the Thunder Dragon's detection, even with the thick mud and debris covering them. But now, the Thunder Dragon was dragging its injured body, and its mental strength was extremely weak. For a moment, it didn't realize that it was being secretly watched by the enemy, until a cold and gloomy figure appeared beside it. Respected Dragon Lord, Grimm sends his regards. The voice that suddenly appeared in the dark tunnel startled Thunder Dragon. It stopped digging and turned around. Its strange, amber-like vertical pupils instantly caught sight of a small figure standing in the darkness in the distance. Earth Elemental. It was a low-tier Earth Elemental that was only at the level of an apprentice. Its body was made of coarse mud, and it wasn't very sturdy. However, a pair of glowing red eyes were staring at it from its round head. Damn it, those magi are finally here. Although it couldn't wait to be rescued, Arms still wanted to run into a group of goblins. No matter how many of those short and weak goblins there were, even with the protection of magic machinery, they were no match for the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon. However, the magi that had appeared briefly before the war had become a huge problem for Arms. If it still had its full strength, it wouldn't need to worry about these low-tier magi. If it encountered them, it would just devour them in one gulp. It wouldn't even need to consider the threat they posed. But now, Arms lowered its head to look at its scaly body. Looking at the wounds that were dripping with a putrid stench, it couldn't hide its solemn expression. Step by step, it walked towards the Earth Elemental. "You're the one behind that explosion?" Although Arms was asking, his expression showed that he already knew the answer. "My apologies, Your Majesty. We didn't set off the spatial furnace to deal with you, but to kill that brain monster. We didn't expect you to appear here." The Earth Elemental's eyes glowed red, and it could faintly feel a strange spiritual fluctuation in its body. Arms couldn't help but look downcast. In its original plan, it didn't even consider entering this inferior plane of goblins. If not for the fact that the energy of the planar gate was slow to fill after sending a group of Draconid scouts, it would not have relied on its extraordinary physique to force its way through the dimensional vortex in a fit of rage. It was too late to say anything now. How could it have imagined that it would encounter such a terrifying void storm in such a lowly and vile small plane? The intensity of the explosion of the spatial furnace was no less than throwing it into an energy storm in outer space. To be honest, the fact that it could survive the explosion was a testament to the strength of its dragon bloodline, as well as its powerful physique. Strength, luck, and experience. If it had been lacking in any of these three, it would have been blown to smithereens. Magus, I am Arms, a grade 3 dragon lord of the Lance Plane. If you can save me and let me go, I'll swear in the name of the dragon god that I'll pay you back with 10 times the amount of wealth you've shown me. It was a rare sight to see the arrogant and violent Thunder Dragon Arms put on an amiable expression. Oh, you mean you'll pay me 10 times the value of a grade 3 dragon? The Earth Elemental's muffled voice reverberated through the air. Even though Arm's face was pale from the blood loss, he couldn't help but turn even paler when he heard the Earth Elemental's words. 10 times the value of a grade 3 dragon. Even if Arms were to skin it alive and collect every drop of its blood and flesh, he still wouldn't be able to gather such a terrifying amount. He'd only said those words to make up for the righteous act of rescuing it. But Arm's words seemed to indicate that the Earth Elemental was already in his grasp. It seemed that the Thunder Dragon God wouldn't be able to resolve such a huge rift through negotiation. Wrath burst forth from Arm's heart. He thrust his once elegant, but now filthy, right hand into the Earth Elemental's chest and crushed its elemental core with all his might. The Thunder Dragon was a variant of the Wind Elemental, which was incompatible with the Earth Elemental. Therefore, Arms chose to destroy instead of devouring it. As the elemental core was crushed, the 1-meter-tall, low-tier Earth Elemental quickly crumbled into a pile of dirt. However, it was as if a war horn had been blown. In the next moment, Arms sensed the unique elemental energy of hundreds of Earth Elementals in the surrounding soil. In the dark tunnel that it had just dug out, several Earth Elementals with the power of a wizard kept appearing one after another. As soon as they formed, they charged at Arms with rumbling footsteps. Arms didn't care about these small fries at all. Its right hand, which was covered in mud and dregs, wriggled and transformed into a bony dragon claw. It clawed through the air, and every time it clawed, it would tear open the chest of an Earth Elemental and extract the elemental core from within. Before the Earth Elementals could even get close to Arms, their cores were crushed and their bodies disintegrated. However, just as Arms was about to gain the upper hand, it suddenly turned around and let out an angry roar. The skinny Earth Elemental that had been hiding in a corner of the tunnel suddenly sank into the ground and disappeared. Chapter 549. Half an hour later, Grimm saw the pitiful level 2 Draconian Zacha. He could tell that the Draconian was lucky to not have been contaminated by the void energy during the explosion. However, at the same time, it was also unfortunate that it had become food for the lightning dragon Arms. Grimm had thought that the Draconian was long dead, but when he used the Earth Elemental to wrap it up, he found that it was barely breathing. Without hesitation, Grimm took out a health potion and fed it to the Draconian. Unfortunately, while it might be able to save its life, it could not heal its limbs and a portion of its torso that had been devoured by the Thunder Dragon. If it wanted to recover further, it would have to move to the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda. It would take at least a few months to fully recover from such a terrifying injury. Even though there were many ways to quickly regrow one's flesh, they were all caused by the sudden stimulation of one's life force in a life or death situation. Once the spell was withdrawn, the damaged parts of the body would need to be carefully nurtured and repaired. However, with the powerful physique of a level 2 Draconian, as long as it had enough food and energy, it would be able to recover at a speed several times faster than a wizard with a weaker physique. Even though Draconian Zacha's life was hanging by a thread, it was still conscious. When Grimm saved it from the Thunder Dragon, it even used its weak mental energy to send a message of gratitude. Even though he did not know how sincere the message was, Grimm saw a chance to subdue it. Grimm did not have the time to slowly nurture the level 2 Draconian, so he handed it over to the poison centipede and let it do whatever it wanted. As for him, he once again focused all his attention on the silent battle underground. In less than a quarter of an hour, the Earth Elemental army that Grimm had built with all his might had been destroyed. The base value of 20 wizard Earth Elementals had reached 50,000 magical crystals. If they were sold in the wizard market, they would be worth around 300,000 magic crystals. The death of the 20 Earth Elementals only brought Grimm more benefits than the Thunder Dragon arms. The Thunder Dragon arms that it had just accumulated was once again used up. Although the Earth Elemental's feedback showed that the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon was on the verge of collapsing, it seemed like it could be brought down with just a little more effort. However, Grimm still didn't dare to be careless. He didn't dare to fight in person. He could only command the Earth Elemental Devil Puppet to circle around the Lightning Dragon, waiting for an opportunity to launch a sneak attack. With him around, the Thunder Dragon wouldn't be able to dig its way out. Under Grimm's command, the Earth Elemental Puppet even destroyed a large portion of the tunnel behind the Thunder Dragon. In this way, the opponent would not even have a path of retreat. Once the Thunder Dragon was surrounded, Grimm sent one Earth Elemental Puppet after another. He wanted to use this opportunity to subdue the frightening Tier 3 Thunder Dragon. However, it was a pity that every time the Devil Centipede emissary was killed by the other party with a single claw strike, then a new round of battles would ensue. After several fruitless attempts, Grimm hardened his heart and stopped sending emissaries to summon the Thunder Dragon. Instead, he focused all his attention on killing the isolated Tier 3 Thunder Dragon. In the past, Grimm wouldn't even dare to think about such a thing. However, due to a fortuitous encounter, he had unexpectedly bumped into a big fish. Grimm would never forgive himself if he lost such an opportunity. The excavation of the ground had stopped. All the goblins had laid down their flags and drums, waiting for news. As the main characters of the battle, Grimm and Bliss hid in a small wooden hut and a tent respectively. Both of them remotely commanded their subordinates to harass and attack the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon in the tunnel. No matter how strong the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon was, the sky was its stage. And underground, it was destined to be a nightmare for the rest of its life. If Arms tried to dig his way out, the Earth Elemental Puppet would charge into the tunnel and harass him, using its innate ability to strengthen the soil around the tunnel. Although this would not be able to solidify the soil into stone, it would increase the difficulty of digging by more than tenfold. If Arms gave up on digging and attacked the Earth Elemental Puppet instead, the Earth Elemental Puppets would burrow into the ground and use their earth spears and mud spells to entangle the Thunder Dragon. Using this method, hundreds of devil centipedes and thorny scorpions roamed around the Thunder Dragon, taking turns to attack, reducing the consumption of the Earth Elemental essence. After all, the Thunder Dragon and thorny scorpions couldn't replenish their Earth Elemental essence in the Goblin Plain. However, one side was stronger than the other. As the two fought underground, it was all about who could last and who would fall first. In this aspect, the Thunder Dragon was clearly at a disadvantage. This underground battle lasted for half a month before the exhausted Thunder Dragon arms collapsed and became a captive of the Earth Elemental Puppet Army. Grimm had obtained a Tier 2 Dragonoid and a Tier 3 Thunder Dragon in one fell swoop. He was so excited that he could barely contain himself. However, an even greater surprise had yet to come. Following the tunnel that the Thunder Dragon had dug, the two thorny scorpions dispatched by the insect lich arrived at the scene of the spatial furnace explosion. The area had become a strange void of energy. Anything that entered the void would be reduced to dust particles that were difficult to discern with the naked eye before being ejected again. The dust particles that were ejected contained extremely powerful energy radiation. One of the thorny scorpions had gotten too close and was hit by a pillar of dust, its body disintegrating immediately. From afar, The void of energy looked like a huge black rock with a diameter of 10 meters, with fine energy particles lingering around it. Amidst the terrifying rumbling sounds, the center of the void of energy emitted a dazzling multicolored energy. The energy was filtered through the layer of dust on the outer shell of the rock, and was no longer as chaotic and violent as it was when it first appeared. It interacted with the laws of the Goblin Plane, turning into waves of extremely pure earth elemental essence that dissipated into the surroundings. Bliss was obviously at a loss when he saw this strange scene, but Grimm, who had an encyclopedia of magi in his head, recognized it at a glance. Beep discovered a wild source of earth elemental essence. Based on analysis, the concentration of the earth elemental essence is violent, not suitable for magi to consume directly. A source of earth elemental essence. Grimm's eyes lit up. To be honest, this was a wild source of earth elemental essence that had yet to be refined or tamed. Although it had been created by a strange explosion, it matched the description of a source of earth elemental essence in Grimm's memories. The so-called source of earth elemental essence was just a name given to it by magi. In reality, it was just a point where the energy of the void and the plane intersected. Here, the violent energy of the void would come into contact with the plane, resulting in an energy siphon. It was because of the existence of a source of earth elemental essence that the plane could receive energy from the void, allowing it to maintain a stable amount of earth elemental essence. As for the Goblin Plane, it was precisely because of the lack of such a wild source of mana that the magical elements within the plane were thin. Hence, it became a notorious low magical plane. Grimm could not help but sigh at the strangeness of fate. If the rank 3 Thunder Dragon had known that there was a source of earth elemental essence at the core of the explosion, it definitely would not have buried itself in digging. If it had stayed within the range of the source of earth elemental essence, it would have replenished its lightning energy. At that time, who in the entire Goblin Plane could stop a rank 3 Thunder Dragon at its peak? However, it was obviously scared out of its wits by the terrifying explosion. All it wanted to do was to leave this place, but it did not know that it had missed a chance that fate had arranged for it to make a comeback. The source of earth elemental essence was a gift from the heavens to powerful magical creatures. However, for those who were not strong enough, it was like a forbidden land of death. Rank 1 magi were still too weak. Once they got close to the source of earth elemental essence, there was a high chance that they would be assimilated into a demonic spirit without a body. As a rank 2 magus, Grimm's body and mind had already been assimilated into the earth elemental essence. Not only would he not be harmed when he got close to the source of earth elemental essence, he could even feel the dense aura of earth elemental essence. If he used up all his earth elemental essence in battle, he would only need to bathe in the source of earth elemental essence for 5 minutes to replenish his earth elemental essence. To an elemental magus, a treasure like this was comparable to a holy artifact. Moreover, Grimm remembered that it was recorded in the books that this source of mana could be shifted away through witchcraft. If he could add it to the magic furnace that he had completed his initial design, he could increase the furnace's power by more than 10 times. Standing 20 meters away from the black sphere, Grimm tried to sense the structure of the source of earth elemental essence. However, no matter how hard he tried, the void at the center of the source of earth elemental essence was just pure darkness in his mind. Regardless of whether it was his spells or his mental perception, he could not get any feedback from his source. The moment his mental force entered the source of earth elemental essence, it would be strangely devoured. Yes, it was devoured, not gone missing. Grimm stood there for a long time before sighing helplessly. The source of earth elemental essence was indeed mysterious and wonderful. With his current strength, he did not have the qualifications to investigate its secrets. After setting up a spatial marker for the area where the source of earth elemental essence was, he tried to seal it. Now it was time for Grimm to roam the underground. The terrifying underground world that a rank 3 Thunder Dragon could not freely traverse. But Grimm could traverse it as if it was flat ground. What he relied on was the powerful support that he relied on, the elemental puppet. Originally, he wanted to hand over the task of developing Steel City to the insect lich Bliss. However, it seemed that even he had underestimated the value of this place, let alone the planar gate that had yet to reveal itself. Even the things he had obtained so far had greatly exceeded his expectations. Chapter 550. Above the Yate Plateau, a black figure was flying close to the ground. Under the illumination of the huge moon in the sky, the black shadow was tall and slender. Looking from afar, it was full of a seductive feeling. But what was frightening was that such a beautiful and seductive figure belonged to a non-human. A pair of wide, flat, gray bat wings spread out behind her. When she glided close to the ground, she was silent and fast like a ghost. She clearly couldn't see any pursuers or abnormalities behind her, but this black figure was like a panicked bird, hurriedly flitting across grasslands, villages, and rivers. She didn't dare to stop at any place for even a moment. Even with her strength, she would be exhausted after flying nonstop for a few hours. Every time this happened, she would dive down and rush into a certain place in the forest. Then there would be some wild movements of some large creatures. However, these voices came out quickly and disappeared just as quickly. After a while, when the black shadow flapped her wings and soared into the sky, there were already one or two withered bodies of large forest beasts somewhere in the forest. In just a few minutes, the blood in the bodies of these large beasts had been sucked clean. Under the illumination of the moonlight, the moment the black figure leaped into the air, a charming but worried face was revealed. Mary. She was the vampire wizard Grimm had sent to spy on Lester. Maybe the strange atmosphere tonight had scared away the nearby forest beasts. Or maybe Mary had sucked so much blood that there was not a trace of blood leaking out. When the sound of flapping wings disappeared in the distant darkness, the forest became quiet again, until a strange black shadow descended upon this place. There were no signs of living beings in the forest. Only the people with the sharpest senses could vaguely feel that the light and shadow seemed to have dimmed a little. Under the bright moonlight, a thin black fog spread in the forest, covering the two withered bodies of the beasts hidden in the bushes. As if it had found something, two scarlet eyes suddenly lit up in the black fog, staring in the direction that Mary escaped to without blinking. Soon after, a cold and ruthless male voice rang out from the mist. She actually has the aura of my bloodline. Strange. Could it be that some experimental subject wasn't cleaned up? No, I have to try activating bloodline summoning. As the red light flashed in the black mist, a faintly discernible strange fluctuation followed the strange bloodline connection and rippled toward a certain place in the distance. However, at this moment, Mary had already flown 50 miles away. But just as she was flapping her large bat wings and flying close to the treetops, an indescribable spiritual call entered her mind. Like a speeding train suddenly stepping on the brakes, Mary's originally light and elegant flying posture suddenly came to an abrupt stop. Her whole body curled up into a ball, breaking countless branches and vines along the way, and fell into the jungle in a sorry state. This sudden fall almost made her dizzy and confused, unable to distinguish between north, south, east, and west. But before she could regain consciousness, her body's strong instincts actually made her jump up, turn around, and run in the direction she came from. Before she could run 5 meters, Mary's consciousness suddenly sobered up, and she immediately regained control of her body. Thus, she suddenly stopped in her tracks. Although her footsteps had stopped, the two consciousnesses were still fiercely trying to regain control of her body. Of course, Mary's consciousness was trying to escape that terrifying demon as fast as possible, but her instincts kept urging her to return to the source of her bloodline. The two consciousnesses were fiercely fighting on all levels of her body, neither willing to let go of even the slightest bit of control over her body. Thus, the originally charming and gorgeous Mary seemed to have ADHD and could not even stand steadily. 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, one hand turning left, the other turning right. Even the muscles on her face began to violently spasm. Her whole body was a mess because of the two consciousnesses tangling with each other. Although the vampire blood flowing in her body had the bloodline imprint of that vampire Lester, she could not resist his orders. But she was not a blood descendant created by him using the embrace, so her soul was not under his control. When the soul and bloodline instincts clashed, both sides could not come to an end, and neither could completely suppress the other and completely control this body. After a long time of bloodline summoning, that blood descendant did not come. Lester, who was hidden in the black mist, finally showed a surprised expression. What a strange bloodline descendant. She could actually resist the summoning of the source of her bloodline. This is unbelievable. Lester's interest in such a strange bloodline descendant was undoubtedly growing. He stopped the bloodline summoning ritual, and the black mist condensed into a pair of giant bat wings that could almost cover the entire forest. As the bat wings flapped slightly, he disappeared on the spot and flew towards the direction of the strange bloodline fluctuation. The enemy was approaching. The strange consciousness in her body had just calmed down, and Mary, who was almost exhausted, did not even have the time to catch her breath before she felt the source of her bloodline approaching from afar. Mary, who had not felt afraid after fighting with the body's instincts for a long time, was immediately frightened to the point that her face turned pale. Without hesitation, she flew up to the sky, flapped her huge bat wings, and fled as fast as she could. In order to get rid of this terrifying enemy, she even used 2 spells, Energy Burst and Extreme Flight. Lester could make her obediently walk back and surrender with just a thought from dozens of miles away. If she really met him face to face, she might not even have the thought of resisting him. So she decided to go all out. She used wizard items, scrolls, magic wands, and potions. Mary used everything that could increase her flying speed just to get as far away from the demon as possible. With her strong mental consciousness, as long as she was more than 100 miles away from him, Lester would probably not be able to sense her specific location. With this simple and stubborn thought, Mary flew at top speed, playing a game of cat and mouse with the terrifying Level 2 vampire Lester on the Yate Highlands, Scattered Tower Forest area, Ferd South City. In a secret room on the top floor of the Wizard's Pagoda, Senazar, Forgan, and Kogan gathered for a secret meeting. As the core wizards of the Salubo family, they had a routine meeting like this almost every other year. Due to the multitude of family affairs this year, the number of regular meetings had also increased. During the regular meeting, Wizard Corgan was the one who quickly reported what had happened in the family over the past year. He reported the distribution of the family's resources, the changes in the internal personnel, the statistics of the advancement of the apprentices. After he was done, Corgan took out a small piece of paper from his sleeve and explained what had happened in the Flame Monarch's Wizard Pagoda. Grimm lived in seclusion within the Wizard's Pagoda, not taking a single step out. They hadn't seen him for half a year. The Wizard's Pagoda had recruited another 2 resident wizards. A month ago, a few core wizards in the Wizard's Pagoda had disappeared for a period of time. Goblin Cabby had also disappeared, but Chief Butler Gargamel was still around. Half a month later, Meryl and Mary returned, but the insect wizard Bliss, the poison centipede Ender, and the mechanic wizard Sabrina were still nowhere to be found. 7 days ago, Mary left for the scattered southwest of Tallinn. Her destination was unknown. Recently, there had been a large number of records of the resources of the Wizard's Pagoda going in and out. It seemed like Grimm's camp was up to something. Almost all of them were the recent developments of the Flame Monarch, as well as the details of important events. Looking at this, the movements of the Flame Monarch were clear to see. Wizard Forgan patiently waited for Wizard Corgan to finish reading all the information. He could not help but bow and ask, "Lord Senazar, do you think? Is there any doubt?" Level 3 Wizard Senazar's shrill voice came from within the purple fog. "That lad is really capable. He only advanced a few days ago, and he already dares to launch a plane invasion. He's really daring." Even though he had already guessed it, Forgan was not as certain as Senazar. He asked doubtfully, "My lord, can he do it with his abilities? That's an invasion of a plane." Forgan, you're too conservative." Senazar could not help but mock him. "If I were you, I wouldn't doubt if he'd dare to do it. I would only wonder where he got the coordinates from. With Grimm's wealth, he should not be able to buy a world waymark for a small plane from the Silver Alliance." Wizard Corgan could not help but ask, could it be that the girl in the north provided it? Hearing this, Senazar thought for a moment and agreed with this idea. How could a mere rank 2 fire wizard like Grimm have the wealth to buy a world waymar from the 3 major organizations? This idea was too ridiculous. The biggest possibility was that he had received help from the outside world. With Grimm's social circle, the only one who could provide him with such help was Alice, who was in the Dragonbone Waste in the north. So, did the few magi who disappeared from the Flame Monarch die in another plane? Or were they stationed there? According to Senazar and Forgan's opinions, the truth was most likely the former. After all, with Grimm's strength, he could only mobilize 6 to 7 magi at his peak, and most of them were new magi. With this kind of strength, unless it was a miniature plane that was lacking in resources, they would not be able to take it. Even if they did, 5 to 6 magi in a small plane would be like sprinkling a pinch of pepper into a small stream. They would not even be able to taste it before disappearing without a trace. Wanting to rule a plane was just wishful thinking. There were too few magi, and it was difficult to form an effective governing structure. They would not be able to successfully develop the resources and wealth of other planes. On top of that, the mana in low-grade planes was thin and was not suitable for magi to train. For the magi stationed there, this was undoubtedly a great torment. Presumably, Grimm would not be willing to be stationed in a low-grade plane that lacked resources and mana all year round. He would have to take care of all the miscellaneous affairs of the secular world, while his own strength would not improve at all. It seemed like Grimm had already suffered a great loss. Chapter 551. It had to be said that after a cruel planar war, the victors would always obtain the most generous spoils of war. A month later, after the local goblin excavation team cleared away tens of millions of mud, debris, and all kinds of miscellaneous items, they finally overcame all kinds of difficulties and dug through the hard soil and rock layers, allowing the city of steel that was buried almost 1,000 meters underground to see the light of day once more. Actually, it could not be considered underground. After all, the Steel City used to be located on the peak of a towering mountain, but it had been buried along with the collapse of the mountain. After clearing away the debris above, the exposed remains of the Steel City showed everyone the violence and ferocity of the great explosion that day. Most of the metal buildings were already broken and distorted beyond recognition. Many of the metal components had even changed their original attributes due to the attack of the energy storm, becoming a little closer to magic iron alloy. However, just as the hundreds of construction machines were operating at full power, using huge chainsaws to cut these metal components into suitable sizes, and then transported them to the mining pit by elevators, something unexpected happened. Under the guidance of a mysterious force, a large pile of twisted and broken metal components suddenly twisted and transformed into a metal giant with a height of 7 to 8 meters under the watchful eyes of the crowd, along with a series of loud, cracking sounds. A crude metal body, broken engineering cables that crackled and emitted sparks, a crooked and twisted metal head, and a metal fist with huge cracks on it. Even though this metal giant was simple and crude to the point that it could not be looked at directly, its 8-meter-tall body and heavy iron fist still caused a destructive blow to the nearby construction machines. With a punch, a construction machine would shrink by half. With a kick, a construction machine would fly into the air, directly falling apart in the air. This strange metal giant was like a tiger that had entered a pack of wolves, beating everyone into a sorry state. Soon after, 5 construction machines were destroyed by its hands, and the goblin mechanics inside became indiscernible dark spots on the dark soil. After all, this was an excavation site, and most of the activities here were all kinds of construction machines. They were not combat magic machines, so they all looked stupid and crude with slow reactions. Their metal bodies were also not equipped with any combat weapons. Making them fight against a killing machine while emitting white smoke and wielding chainsaws and metal drills was indeed a bit too much. When the few battle magic machines in the field saw this, they immediately roared and charged forward at full power, using a continuous barrage of goblin fire arrows and goblin rapid-fire cannons to blast the guy that suddenly appeared full of holes, metal fragments flying everywhere. However, just as the battle magic machines were about to achieve victory, the metal giant waved its arms wildly and forced the battle magic machines away, before striding towards the burning construction machinery. With a loud roar, it inserted its suddenly liquefied arms into the wreckage of the construction machine. In the next second, a strange incident that left all the gnomes flabbergasted happened. The construction machine, which had been covered in black smoke a moment ago and had lost its ability to move, suddenly came to life. Its body that was already torn apart once again split into tens of thousands of tiny engineering and mechanical parts, and then like birds returning to their nests, they surged into the metal giant's body. The metal giant, that was originally 8 meters tall, suddenly devoured a broken construction machine. The huge metal body grew taller again with a creaking sound that made one's teeth ache and legs go soft. It was now 10 meters tall. Many of the metal parts that originally belonged to the construction machines were also transferred to its body. As the gigantic metal chainsaw let out a deafening roar, the metal giant that was originally unarmed now had a metal chainsaw in its left hand and a metal drill in its right hand. Its chest and back were covered with a layer of glowing metal armor. It actually armed itself. As if it had noticed its strange metal ability, the metal giant blocked the attacks of the battle magic machines while leaping towards the other damaged construction machines around the battlefield. Just like that, it forcefully withstood the attacks of the 6 battle magic machines and absorbed the damaged construction machines into its body. In the blink of an eye, it had become a 15-meter-tall metal giant with all kinds of strange equipment wrapped around its body. At this moment, as the metal composition increased, it became more and more unstoppable. The battle magic machines that were able to force it to run away no longer dared to approach its body. They could only fight it from afar. When one of the battle magic machines could not dodge in time, the metal giant's fist smashed into its chest. The metal plate was severely dented, and the sound of the gnome mechanic spurting out blood could be heard. Following that, blood flowed out from the inside. After devouring the battle magic machine, the metal giant that originally only had primitive mechanical weapons actually transformed itself. The metal parts on its body were modified into gnome rapid-fire cannons with shocking attack power. Countless black cannon muzzles extended out of its gigantic body, and the fist-sized metal bullets instantly turned the remaining 5 battle magic machines into sieves. This time, the gnomes completely collapsed. One after another, the gnome mechanics crazily crawled out of the construction machines and gathered with the other gnomes. They were like a group of ants that had their nest blown up as they desperately rushed to the dirt road and the elevators around the pit. Pushing and shoving, crying and screaming, the bottom of the pit in the excavation site instantly turned into a mess. However, just as the gnomes were scrambling to escape from the terrifying metal giant that could never be killed, a blinding scarlet sun suddenly rose from the bottom of the pit. Following that, a terrifying, pure white pillar of light crossed over their heads and struck the center of the metal giant's chest from afar. This pillar of light had a diameter of 1 meter. It looked ordinary, but it had a terrifying temperature that left one speechless. After being struck by the pillar of light, the metal parts within the range of the pillar of light instantly melted and flowed down like hot wax. The metal giant seemed to have sensed danger and frantically struggled left and right in an attempt to escape from the pillar of light. However, the pillar of light seemed to have a mind of its own. No matter which direction the metal giant ran in, it would always follow it closely, never leaving its chest. As if knowing that it could no longer escape from the attack of the pillar of light, the metal giant suddenly stopped and roared. Hundreds of black cannon muzzles extended out of its body with a strange sound, instantly firing at the source of the pillar of light. The huge metal bullets and the light of flames interacted in the air, immediately turning the excavation site into a terrifying battlefield. However, the battle between the two only lasted for 7 seconds before the metal giant was defeated. In the hands of the Grade 2 fire wizard Grimm, the light of flames had unparalleled destructive power. The metal giant's 3-meter-thick body was penetrated by the pure white pillar of light, and it directly penetrated the mud wall 50 meters behind it, forming a large hole. The center of the metal giant's chest seemed to be the weak point of the metal giant. With that spot penetrated, the metal giant lost its ability to fight. It swayed a few times before falling heavily to the ground. Grimm walked towards the gigantic body of the metal monster with determined steps. Although he was 2 meters tall, which was considered a big guy among humans, in front of this strange metal monster, he was still as small as a bean next to a giant cheese. A crack suddenly appeared in the ground beside the metal giant, and thousands of black beetles surged out. Shortly after, they condensed into the black-robed insect which bliss. "Master, why does this fellow look so familiar?" "Of course it looks familiar." Grimm had a disdainful smile on his face. "Because it's also an old friend of ours." "You mean it's that fellow?" Insect which bliss asked hesitantly. "I knew Grade 3 fellows wouldn't die so easily. That thunder dragon is still alive, so what's so surprising about Garzruvi being alive as well?" After saying that, Grimm's body exploded into a ball of flames, appearing on the metal giant's chest. He reached in with his hand that was burning with golden flames and pulled out a strange brain the size of a human's head. There were more than 10 tentacles dangling from its body. Garzruvi was once the size of a small mountain, but at this moment his body was no bigger than a human's brain. Grimm's blazing light had pierced through the top left of his brain and had burned away almost a third of his brain. Grimm used his hand to push away the tentacles hanging from the broken brain and found that it was limp and lifeless. After all, anyone who had a third of their brain burned away would not be able to survive. "Master, is it still alive? Why can't I sense any signs of life? Did you kill it just now?" Insect which bliss turned into a cloud of black mist and flew onto the metal giant's body and solidified beside Grimm. "Dead? That's good." Grimm's smile grew wider. "Since it's dead, I'll burn it all." After saying that, the flames on Grimm's hand burned even brighter. "Not dead, not dead." "I'm not dead." Garzruvi, who had wanted to pretend to be dead, had no choice but to remove his disguise and regain his life force. He seemed to know that his strength was not enough to fight against the leader of the Magi in front of him, so the miniaturized Garzruvi could only stay in Grimm's hand, enduring the crimson flames. "Speak. How did you escape that explosion?" Grimm looked at the little fellow in his hand and asked calmly. Although his tone was calm, Garzruvi could feel the pressure of death from his words. Chapter 552. Being reborn from a single drop of blood was no doubt an exaggeration. Garzruvi's current abilities were similar to the insect lich bliss. Even if most of the brain was destroyed, as long as a portion of it remained, it could grow stronger. Unfortunately, Garzruvi's abilities were linked to the size of its brain. With a severe lack of energy and nutrition, it could barely grow from 2 or 3 fingernail-sized brain fragments into an abnormal brain capable of normal thought. With its current head-sized body, it could only control metallic substances and mechanical structures that had been contaminated by magical energy. As for the mental ability it had previously mastered, it could no longer be used due to its lack of mental strength. Now that a third of its newly grown brain had been destroyed by its old rival, Grimm, it was having difficulty maintaining a complete thought process. Otherwise, it would not have played such a lowly trick as faking its death in front of a Grade 2 fire wizard. For some reason, after the brain was damaged and turned into a cerebellum, Gazruvi's memories and emotions had suddenly become a lot more blurry and indifferent. Even though Gazruvi's entire life's memories were stored in the cerebellum, memories were still memories, and the newly grown abnormal brain's instincts were clearly the dominant one. Otherwise, it would not have fawned over its old rival out of fear of death. Ignoring the other's goodwill and weakness, Grimm's hands glowed red as a series of fire runes formed a series of strange spells that entered the abnormal brain's body. Grimm's eyes were filled with a sharp glint as he coldly said, "Release your mental defenses." The fist-sized abnormal brain shuddered slightly, and its grayish-white brain structure could not help but tremble. It could not be clearer what the other party was trying to do. Soul brand. This was a spiritual brand that was directly etched into the soul. Once it was branded, the abnormal brain soul would not have any secrets from the other party. As long as the other party wanted to know, they could investigate the abnormal brain's soul state at any time, as well as what it was thinking at that time. And if the abnormal brain had any unfavorable thoughts, the other party would be able to understand them clearly through the soul brand. At that time, as long as the other party sent a thought of suicide, the abnormal brain would be driven by its soul instincts to execute it perfectly. If it was still that lowly gnome, it would be powerless to resist and could only kneel and surrender. But now, in any case, it was a powerful Tier 3 monster. How could it? Before the alien brain could come up with a perfect strategy, Grimm closed his palm, and his fingers, which were burned red by the flames, sank into the alien brain's body. The trembling gray matter of the brain was burnt black by the flames, emitting a pungent stench. The alien brain could feel Grimm's murderous intent from the inside out. If he did not reassure the other party, he was afraid that the other party would completely destroy him in the next second. If a monster like the alien brain was allowed to escape, it would be able to turn back into the terrifying giant brain it once was in 10 days to half a month. At that time, all the metal in the goblin plane would become its body, and all the magical machines would become its slaves. Who would be able to stop it from regaining control of this world? Therefore, if Grimm did not want the demiplane that he had just gained control to be taken away by others, he had to turn it into one of his own. Under Grimm's direct threat of death, the alien brain finally recognized its current situation. It lowered its head in dejection and dejectedly lowered its mental barrier. To be honest, as a Tier 2 fire shaman, leaving his own soul brand on a Tier 3 monster soul was extremely difficult for Grimm and the alien brain. The alien brain was in excruciating pain, while Grimm was exhausted. After a quarter of an hour, the two finally completed the soul branding, and the weakened Tier 3 alien brain became Grimm's soul slave. Once the soul branding was complete, Grimm let out a roar and threw the alien brain away, holding its head as it slumped to the ground. It couldn't be helped. The moment the soul contract was completed, the Tier 3 alien brain's soul message flooded Grimm's weak consciousness. Beep. Detected an abnormal soul channel. Requesting host's instructions to maintain the connection? No. Turn off first. Moments later, with the help of the AI chip, Grimm temporarily cut off the connection with the alien brain, breaking free from the sea of soul messages. Grimm stood up with Bliss's help, wiping away the black blood that flowed from his nostrils. Only then did he return to normal. As expected of a Tier 3 monster, the amount of memories and information in its mind was simply innumerable. If Grimm had absorbed all of it without any sense of urgency, his brain might have exploded. However, with the AI chip's help, Grimm no longer cared about anything related to the alien brain. He allowed the AI chip to silently sort out the information that had been transmitted to him through the soul contract. Once the AI chip was done sorting out the information, he only needed to take a brief look. With the soul contract, even if the alien brain was a rank higher than him, it would not be able to escape his control. So now, the abnormal brain had become the most trustworthy one among his many subordinates. The moment Grimm stood up, he impatiently asked the alien brain that had floated back to his side, "What do you need to recover?" While the alien brain did not have a body or any other organs, it relied on its powerful spiritual force to easily float in the air. The alien brain was now like a docile kitten, curled up on Grimm's left shoulder and using a strange telepathy to communicate with him. Huge amounts of energy and nutrient fluid. The alien brain did not have digestive organs and could only use its gray matter to absorb liquid nutrients and magic energy bit by bit. In the past, it had the greater spatial furnace as its energy source, which allowed it to expand like a balloon. Now that the greater spatial furnace had been destroyed, it had lost a stable source of energy. It could only rely on Grimm to find a new source of energy for it. Grimm did not say anything, pointing into the air. The curled-up alien brain suddenly became spirited. At this moment, there was a giant airship floating in the air above the excavation site. It was the reason why the goblins were able to transport so many excavating machines and living resources into this clear area. It was also responsible for transporting the useful waste excavated from the excavation site to distant places so that the goblins could filter and process them. Now, with Grimm's approval, this giant airship immediately became the most exquisite cake in the eyes of the alien brain. The dozen or so tentacles under the alien brain's body danced and struck itself with several spiritual forces. Camouflage, invisibility, haste. With the support of many strange spiritual forces, the fist-sized alien brain turned into a bolt of lightning and flew into the sky. It found a gap and entered the airship. The first 15 minutes were so peaceful that it almost made people fall asleep. 15 minutes later, however, the giant airship floating high up in the sky began to boil. The goblins inside fled in panic, taking all kinds of aircraft to escape from the airship. Without Grimm's approval, the alien brain did not dare to devour the sweet flesh. Otherwise, none of the goblin technicians would be able to leave the airship alive. After the goblins were driven away, the airship's appearance actually changed slightly amidst a series of metallic creaks. The other goblins were so frightened by the scene that they did not notice it at all. Grimm, on the other hand, used the AI chip's meticulous spiritual scan to see everything. It was obvious that the alien brain was not very satisfied with its new ride after taking control of the spatial furnace in the airship. Hence, it used the overflowing mana to slightly change the structure and appearance of the airship. One had to know that the giant airship had always been the pride of the old goblin, Gazruvi. The structure of the cabin and the shape of the airship were the old goblin's proudest masterpiece. It had appeared in the Goblin Empire for more than 10 years, but no goblin had been able to propose any changes. But now, with just a moment of control, the alien brain that had grown up from Gazruvi's memories was able to discover so many illogical and unscientific aspects. This was enough to prove that the alien brain was much stronger than Gazruvi of the past. After the changes, the new airship drew a beautiful arc in the air and began to descend rapidly into the deep pit, finally hovering 20 meters above the bottom of the pit. Steadily, propelled by magical energy, the airship no longer seemed to be drifting. Instead, it was wedged into the void like a nail, not moving an inch. Grimm's spiritual consciousness communicated with the alien brain in the invisible airship. A moment later, as a small opening opened at the bottom of the giant ship, a powerful energy storm swept out from inside, like a waterspout, sucking in the mud, debris, and all kinds of odd-shaped substances at the bottom of the pit. A thin layer of soil could be seen to the naked eye at the bottom of the deep pit. At the same time, many windows opened on the side of the airship, ejecting out the dirt that had been sucked in. The useful substances that had been filtered out were left in the belly of the airship. This efficiency was much higher than having 100 construction machines working at the same time. Grimm saw with his own eyes how efficient the alien brain was at controlling the airship and was naturally very satisfied. After giving a few simple instructions to the alien brain, Grimm hurriedly left the excavation site and headed towards the teleportation device. Chapter 553. It was a huge manor located 30 miles west of Stirk City. Night had just fallen. The Rose Manor was brightly lit, and guests had gathered. The small square in front of the manor with a fountain in the center was filled with carriages of the nobles from the surrounding cities. One after another, noble ladies dressed in expensive furs walked out of the carriages gracefully. They were accompanied by gentlemen in luxurious robes as they walked arrogantly into the manor. At the entrance of the manor, rows of attendants in formal suits were waiting for the arrival of the guests. From time to time, they would loudly announce the distinguished titles of the guests. Lester? Vic silently stood on the balcony on the top floor of the three-story building in the center of the manor. He held a glass of truffle wine in his hand and gently swirled it, letting the blood-red wine ripple in the glass and emit the sweet and intoxicating fragrance of blood. The truffle wine was personally made by the most famous master of the Vic family, Rito Fink. It was made with the sweetest blood from the heart of a virgin and the dew of a pine cone collected from the edge of the silent forest. Then, it was mixed with the pollen of dozens of jasmine, wild rose, and rose. The truffle wine that was blended in such a way was simply the most luxurious enjoyment of the vampire family. Therefore, its price was not affordable for ordinary vampires. Only a top-notch vampire like Lester could enjoy it as a daily pastime without batting an eyelid. Lester was tall and handsome. He looked like he was only 30 years old. He had a high nose and deep eyes. His irises were red and his pupils were golden. His dark brown, slightly curly hair was draped over his shoulders. The lines on his face were slightly firm. His perfect mustache was combed neatly, and his exposed skin was pale white, which was what all nobles dreamed of. He was wearing a well-tailored black suit. The fabric was smooth and soft, and it felt good to the touch. It was obvious that it was expensive. There was a metal chain hanging in the pocket of his suit. It seemed to be a pocket watch. Just as he expressionlessly examined the venue where the guests gathered and the dancing dancers, a clear male voice rang out behind him. "Earl Lester, all the guests have arrived. They are waiting for your arrival." The newcomer was the host of the Rose Manor, Viscount Antia, who had been sent here by the Vic family. As an ancient vampire family, the Vic family had divided the vampires in the family into 5 classes: Duke, Marquis, Earl, Viscount, and Baron. Dukes corresponded to grade 4. Marquises corresponded to grade 3. Earls corresponded to grade 2. Viscounts corresponded to grade 1. And Barons corresponded to quasi-sorcerers. As for those below the quasi-sorcerer rank, they were not even recorded in the Vic family's genealogy. Once they died, not even a name would be left behind. Due to the advanced characteristics of the vampires, their training methods were destined to be completely different from ordinary sorcerers. Chasing after the blood of the strong was their instinct, and it was also the only way for them to strengthen themselves. Sucking the blood of ordinary people could only sustain their lives, but only sucking the blood of powerful creatures could make them stronger. Therefore, they were also the group that had the closest contact with the ordinary people in the territory. In the hereditary territory of the Vic clan, every large manor would hold a grand carnival from time to time. These banquets would also invite the nobles from the surrounding cities, especially the noble ladies. This was the best opportunity for them to get close to the feudal lords. Ordinary ignorant commoners might have a great fear of vampires, thinking that they were monsters that sucked human blood and demons that spread death. However, the local nobles that belonged to the Vic clan did not think so. They lived in a territory ruled by a vampire family, so they could only dedicate their talents and abilities to these gentle and cultured foreign sorcerers. After interacting with each other for a long time, they naturally realized that vampires were not as scary as the rumors made them out to be. Vampire sorcerers were just like them. They needed to eat, drink, live, and have a large number of servants to serve them. Moreover, the greatest characteristic of vampires was their eternal youth. Even if they could not become a vampire, as long as they became a vampire's blood slave or a lowly derivative, they could slow down the aging process and make young men and women more handsome and beautiful. If vampires were demons, then vampires were also demons who spread beauty and ageless looks. For such demons, after overcoming their aversion to blood, they would become so amiable and mesmerizing. Therefore, those vain, flashy, and delusional noble ladies fell in love with such carnival banquets. At such banquets, if they were lucky enough to catch the eye of a distinguished guest of the Vic clan and take a small bite, then they would become the object of envy of all the noble ladies within 100 miles. Although from now on, she might become a blood slave who would listen to his every word, but who would care about such things? What did losing a little bit of freedom matter when they had youth and status? Therefore, when they suddenly heard that the rising star of the Vic clan, Lester, had arrived at the Rose Manor, almost all the influential people within 100 to 300 miles impatiently rushed over. They had also brought along all the women of their respective families, whether they were mature and voluptuous ladies, graceful and delicate noble girls, or even specially trained beauties. All of them were so graceful and elegant, so charming and lovely, so charming and moving. In such an occasion, the male guests all drew closer to the preferences of the vampires. All of them wore well-ironed formal attire, looking cultured and refined, as if their clans had a deep history. A pale face, a refined temperament, a small row of sharp teeth, and an unfathomable smile. It couldn't be helped. It was said that there would be a high-ranking viscount from the vampire castle attending tonight's banquet. This, to the majority of the male guests, it was not a small encouragement and stimulation. Therefore, when Lester calmly examined the faces in the banquet hall that were pretending to be calm, and the plump but lacking in vitality, he calmly examined the faces in the banquet hall. Not only did he not arouse any bloodthirsty lust, he also did not arouse any interest in feigning civility with them. "Is Lorcy already here?" Lester asked coldly, stroking the two exquisite little mustaches on his lips. "Lady Lorcy has already arrived. She seems to like today's banquet very much." Viscount Inchia, as a low-ranking vampire of the Vic clan, could only politely remind him in this manner. With Inchia's reminder, Lester quickly found Viscount Lorcy, who was in the eye of the storm, in the banquet hall. She was a beautiful and charming woman in a pure black evening gown. She had a crystal-clear and round face like ivory, a high-nosed bridge, rose-colored lips, and scarlet and cute blood-red eyes. Her long dark brown hair hung down her back, reaching her waist. Under the illumination of the bright magic lamp, her snow-white chest appeared towering and majestic. As the center of attention in the banquet, more than a dozen handsome and robust young nobles surrounded her like stars surrounding the moon. They told her some jokes that made her convulse with laughter. She was laughing so hard that she was swaying back and forth. She looked like a slut. As if sensing Lester's gaze, the smiling Viscount Lorcy's blood-red eyes flickered. Separated by the crowd, separated by a distance of more than 100 meters, she clashed with him from afar. Viscount Lorcy raised the wine glass in her hand slightly, and an insolent smile appeared on her delicate face, as if she was saluting Lester from afar. However, the young nobles around her obviously did not understand her intention. They thought that the beautiful and charming Viscount Lorcy was responding to their request, so they all raised their glasses and downed the wine in one gulp. The reason why this banquet was held today was not for the vampire nobles to enjoy themselves, but to have a hint of a marriage alliance between nobles. Since Lester had advanced to level 2, his status in the clan had also risen with each passing day, and he had gradually become a person with real power. Under such circumstances, the elders of the clan could not wait to find a suitable vampire bride for him. Of course, the first choice had to be from the high-ranking female vampires. Thus, after much selection, the high-ranking Viscount Lorcy of another vampire clan located 730 miles southwest of the Vic clan's Blood Castle was chosen. Although Lorcy was currently only a level 1 elite, she was only 103 years old and was the best candidate for her clan to advance to level 2. Thus, once the level 2 Lester and the level 1 elite Lorcy were together, the relationship between the two great vampire clans would be greatly improved. When the time came, if they could unite, the strength of the clan would definitely rise to the next level, and they would become the most famous vampire clan in the southwest of Scattered Tower Forest. Thus, today's banquet was actually a meeting arranged by the two great vampire clans, and these invited nobles were only the background of the banquet hall. To be honest, Lester was also very against today's banquet. He had always felt that this was a conspiracy of an opposing elder in the clan. He had just advanced to level 2, and it was time for him to advance by leaps and bounds. Forcing him to mate with a female vampire at this time and give birth to a pure-blooded descendant would undoubtedly greatly damage his development potential. At this moment, there were already 200 to 300 male and female guests gathered in the banquet hall. They gathered in twos and threes, chatting enthusiastically, and the atmosphere in the hall became more and more lively. It was also time for the master, Lester, to show himself. Lester straightened his body and tidied up his appearance. Before he left, he suddenly remembered something. "Where's the female vampire I brought back?" "She's already locked up in the blood prison under the manor. Many more people have been assigned to watch over her, so there won't be any problems." Viscount Inchia replied with a smile. Keep an eye on her for me. Tomorrow, I want to uncover the mastermind behind her." Chapter 554. When Grimm stepped out of the black carriage, the banquet in the Rose Manor had already started. Since he was in a hurry, Grimm didn't have time to make any arrangements. He could only rent a carriage from a nearby city and rush to the Rose Manor. Grimm didn't wear his eye-catching sorcerer robe. He had changed into a wig, a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles, and a black double-breasted suit. Coupled with his black hair and black eyes, he looked cultured and refined, but also had a hint of nobility and arrogance that ordinary people couldn't detect. Everything happened too suddenly. Grimm had already told Mary not to get too close to Lester and that she only needed to gather some simple information about him from the outside. But obviously, Mary didn't follow his instructions. The existence of the bloodline shackles had caused Mary to be stuck at the level of a Tier 1 elite for too long. Grimm's successful advancement to Tier 2 had greatly stimulated the competitive female vampire. Although the two of them were already an intimate couple in the open and in the dark, Mary's desire to be strong was still etched in her bones. Therefore, she had an extraordinary passion and motivation to hunt Lester. But unfortunately, just as Grimm's hunting plan was being carried out in an orderly manner, a terrifying piece of news came back. Lester had also advanced to Tier 2 and became a terrifying vampire count. This was obviously far beyond the scope of the original hunting plan. If a Tier 2 vampire went on a killing spree, it wouldn't take more than a month for him to create a slave army purely made up of blood thralls and spawns. If a vampire family went all out, they could turn the entire central continent into a world of vampires in half a year. Unfortunately, under the supervision of the Scattered Terran Wizard Association, no vampire family dared to do something so crazy. If they only produced descendants or blood thralls in their own territories, no sorcerer would interfere. However, if they extended their tentacles into someone else's territory, they would be attacked by all sorcerers. Moreover, vampires live by sucking the blood of intelligent beings. If they turned all the people in their territory into blood thralls or derivatives, then they would fall into an awkward situation where they had nothing to eat. Under the control of these two reasons, all the vampire families living in the sorcerer world lived extremely disciplined lives and strictly controlled the number of blood thralls and spawns in their territories. Because of this, the lives of the people in their territory were almost the same as in other places. That was why there were no mass exodus due to fear of the vampire overlord. However, the vampire's dormancy did not mean that they were weak. If a comprehensive evaluation could be carried out, then vampire sorcerers would even occupy a position in the upper middle among all sorcerers of the same rank. They might not be the strongest, the fastest, or the strongest in defense, but they were the most cunning. All vampires have their own strengths and weaknesses. Its advantage was that it could run fast, transform into a bat, and was good at hiding. Its biggest advantage was that it could suck blood and recover quickly. As for its weakness, it was publicly acknowledged that its attack power was on the weak side. When facing opponents of the same rank, vampires' attack power was generally on the weak side. They could only rely on sucking blood to slowly wear down the opponent's attack power and defensive spells. Because Mary knew how difficult it was to deal with a rank 2 vampire, she was driven by her restless vampire instincts and tried to sneak up on Lester. Unsurprisingly, her movements were detected by the other party. After a 5-day chase and killing, Mary, who was affected by her bloodline instincts, could not even use her abilities and was captured alive by Lester. After checking Mary's bloodline, Lester could not help but be shocked. To put it bluntly, this descendant of a mysterious bloodline that came out of nowhere had a shocking level of development in her bloodline. To put it bluntly, this level of development had already surpassed Lester before he had leveled up. In other words, this foreign blood lady who was captured and defeated had a shockingly high success rate in leveling up to rank 2. The main reason why she had not leveled up was because of the bloodline shackles. Now that Lester had leveled up to rank 2, the upper limit of the bloodline shackles had loosened. This mysterious blood lady only needed to adjust for a period of time before she could consider leveling up. Bloodline backlash was terrifying, but as a vampire family, they had many ways to control this kind of non-pure-blooded foreign descendant. That was why Lester did not want to waste Mary, who was an excellent blood subordinate, so he did not execute her on the spot. Instead, he brought her to the Rose Manor and planned to bring her back to the ancient Blood Castle after he was done with the matters here. Time was of the essence, and Grimm didn't have the time to slowly plan. Therefore, after receiving the news, he could only rush to the Rose Manor. Grimm's arrival immediately caught the attention of the servants waiting at the entrance. Truth be told, Grimm's attire was not that luxurious, and the four-wheeled carriage he rode in was inconspicuous among the many luxurious carriages. It even seemed a little shabby. However, when Grimm stood proudly in front of the manor's entrance with his hands stroking the buttons on his chest, the domineering aura that assaulted the faces of the servants immediately made them realize that an important person had arrived. Although Grimm had tried his best to restrain his mental pressure, his words, actions, and even the tips of his brows still exuded a domineering aura that could not be concealed by his attire. "Sir, may I know who you are?" The head servant who received guests at the entrance was also a blood thrall of the Vic family. His status was almost equivalent to that of a mid-level noble. In a normal sorcerer family, he would be considered a wizard apprentice. Grimm did not say much and simply gave his name. It was a lonely name without even a family title. Not only did the chief attendant in charge of reception not show any contempt, he even became more cautious and respectful. This was the sorcerer continent, and sorcerers had always been respected. Most of the sorcerers who had fought their way to the top only had a personal name and no family name. This was a stark contrast to the sorcerers raised by sorcerer families, but no one dared to look down on them. This visitor did not look like an ordinary person. He did not have a family name, so the experienced head servant immediately realized that he was a sorcerer who had hidden his identity. In the entire sorcerer continent, any manor or castle would welcome a sorcerer who came to visit. Therefore, under the loud announcement, Grimm passed through the tall and spacious door and entered the banquet hall. Since the band was playing cheerful and relaxing music, and many young noble men and women were competing with each other on the dance floor, Grimm's arrival did not attract anyone's attention. Only the head servant waved his hand to summon a servant and whispered a few words into his ear. The servant then hurried to the main building of the manor. Ever since he came to this mysterious sorcerer world, Grimm had participated in all kinds of banquets. However, those banquets were organized by acolytes, and those were banquets organized by sorcerers. The invited guests were very simple, and their purpose was also very simple. The format of the banquet was also very simple, even a little boring. However, there were countless handsome men and beautiful women in bright clothes chasing each other and laughing to their heart's content in front of them, which had never happened before. Perhaps this was the lifestyle of those sorcerers who had given up on the path of sorcery and indulged in worldly power. Although they were both banquets, there was a clear distinction between the inner and outer area. The inner area was the banquet hall on the first floor of the three-story building in the center of the manor. Most of the people who could attend the banquet were nobles and wealthy merchants from major cities. Of course, there were also many well-chosen ladies and beautiful young girls. As for the lower and middle nobles, they could only gather around the lawn near the main building, the parlor, the botanical garden, and the boulevard. Here, they could also meet many big shots who had sneaked out from the main hall. Therefore, wherever Grimm went, the liveliness was no less than the main hall. Although Grimm was not a body refinement sorcerer, he did not have monstrous muscles that were as hard as iron. However, he was 2 meters tall, which gave him a well-proportioned body that was almost perfect. In addition, he was wearing an exquisite tailored suit, which added a hint of gentleness and elegance to his temperament. Along the way, he did not have to deliberately seduce anyone. Countless beautiful ladies were already casting coquettish glances at him. Some bold and unrestrained women even stopped him and passionately interacted with him with lustful expressions. Although these vulgar ladies did not have the eyesight to see through Grimm's identity, they could naturally chase after the aura of a strong person. Even though Grimm had restrained his overflowing spiritual force, his surging life force was like a huge magnetic field that naturally attracted these women. Grimm's gaze swept over them, and he knew what was going on. Half of the women gathered around him were blood thralls of the Vic family. They surrounded high-grade vampires every day and served them attentively, selling their youth and bodies to gain their favor. Individuals with strong vitality like Grimm were the best targets for them to hunt. Once they seduced their prey into their bed, they would secretly absorb their life force while having sex. This was the only way for them to accumulate strength and become stronger. Once they broke through the threshold and successfully became a baron, which was equivalent to a quasi-wizard, they would be able to get rid of their status as blood thralls and officially become members of the Vic family. Therefore, when they saw such a fresh and delicious prey in the banquet hall, almost half of the female blood thralls in the periphery of the Vic family were attracted to him. They gathered around Grimm to flirt and show off their flirtatious ways. Of course, this was also because Grimm had concealed his identity as a grade 2 sorcerer. Chapter 555. To be honest, Grimm was not very good at dealing with situations like this. Perhaps it would be a good idea to slightly release the spiritual pressure of a grade 2 magus. But if he did that, there would be a dozen or so women crying for their parents and pissing their pants. After all, apart from the female blood thralls of the Vic family, there are also a few ordinary ladies and young ladies who are out hunting. With their empty and dispirited spiritual force, they would probably collapse with just a little stimulation. Because of this, Grimm frowned slightly, and a cold and stern expression appeared on his handsome and tough face, as if he was 1,000 miles away from everyone. If the people gathered around him were the high-class nobles in the inner field, they would have tactfully left to search for easier targets. However, the group of women in front of him had obviously been bewitched by Grimm's sturdy physique and unique temperament. Even though their target was clearly angry, this did not dispel their high expectations. Instead, it made them even more fascinated. Some of the mature ladies who thought they were flirtatious began to tease Grimm with even more explicit words. Some of the bolder ones even moved closer to Grimm, teasing him with their words while trying to touch Grimm's sturdy chest. Grimm's expression turned cold, and 2 small flames began to burn in the depths of his black pupils. He had already made up his mind. Anyone who dared to touch him with their filthy hands would be incinerated into ashes. What are you people doing? Back off. Just as Grimm was about to reach the end of his patience, a clear but dignified female voice sounded from not far away. The women turned around in surprise, and after seeing who it was, their expressions changed. Lady Lorcy. Greetings, Lady Lorcy. After a series of noisy but orderly bows and greetings, the girls left one after another, leaving Grimm and the newcomer at the scene. Grimm relaxed a little, and only then did he start to size up the newcomer. Fair and translucent faces, high noses, bright red lips and scarlet eyes unique to vampires. It had to be said that there might be some kind of beauty gene hidden in the bloodline of vampires. This made all vampires, be it male or female, so handsome, beautiful, and full of charm. In addition, she was wearing a pure black evening gown, which made her look even more beautiful and graceful. A rank 1 elite female vampire. With the help of the AI chip, Grimm only needed half a finger to see through the other party's basic strength. With the difference in rank, it was impossible for the other party to hide her strength. If a vampire of this strength was within 3 meters of Grimm, and he was not prepared, there was a high chance that she could injure him. Of course, if the other party really attacked, Grimm might be injured, but the other party would definitely not be able to escape Grimm's spells. With Grimm's current attack power, if the other party did not have any powerful defensive equipment, it would not be strange for her to be killed in a single blow. That was why Grimm hesitated, but did not stop the other party from approaching him. Other women might not be able to tell that Grimm was a sorcerer, but as an elite member of her family, Lorcy could sense the surging flame energy in his body even with her eyes closed. Other women might not be able to see through Grimm's identity as a magus, but as an elite member of her family, Lorcy could sense the surging flame energy in the other party's body even with her eyes closed. If the other party was only a rank 1 magus, he should not have been able to block her spiritual senses, making her unable to see through him. However, if the other party was a rank 2 magus, it would be even more unreasonable. At the end of the day, today's gathering was just an internal marriage between 2 vampire families. No magi from the outside had been invited. Therefore, it was quite confusing for this powerful sorcerer to barge in so abruptly. "Your Excellency, welcome to Rose Manor." Lorcy was indeed someone who had seen the world. She immediately welcomed him with a face full of smiles. "Since you're here, why don't you come inside with me?" The young nobles behind Lorcy immediately revealed expressions of jealousy and hatred, and all of them looked at Grimm with hostility. Although this was the first time Lorcy had visited Rose Manor, in the short span of 2 hours, she had successfully captured the hearts of every young noble with her irresistible charm. If it was in normal times, with their rationality and upbringing, they would not do such a thing of jealousy. But today, under Lorcy's powerful charm, a few of the young nobles could not help but become hot-headed. They all rushed in front of Grimm, clamoring for a duel. Lady Lolth scolded them softly with a sullen face, but in the corner of her eyes, there was a hint of arrogance. It was obvious that these bewitched young nobles had become her stepping stones to test Grimm's strength. Grimm was nearly 2 meters tall, and even though he was surrounded by a circle of people, he still looked outstanding. His gaze did not land on these commoners, nor did it land on the female vampire, who seemed to be angry but was actually happy. Instead, he raised his head slightly, and a pair of powerful eyes pierced through the wooden window on the 3rd floor of the small building, colliding with a pair of eyes hidden in the darkness. Their gazes met in midair, and both parties could not help but feel a chill in their hearts. It seemed that this was the main character. Since he had found the main character, Grimm could not be bothered to waste his time with a bunch of useless soldiers and crab generals. He released his immense spiritual pressure and used his hands to separate the crowd in front of him. He walked confidently in front of Lorcy, who had a shocked expression on her face. "Beautiful Miss Lorcy, I'll have to trouble you to show me around this beautiful manor." As he spoke, Grimm's large hands had already wrapped around Lorcy's slender waist, and he led her towards the main building not far away. A grade 2 magus. He really was a grade 2 magus. Lorcy could not help but be frightened by this frightening reality. Her limbs turned cold, and she was at a loss. Although she had always been dissolute, she had great confidence in her own strength. But now that she was facing a grade 2 magus, she could not help but tremble when the other party's gaze landed on her. She could even feel an unbearable burning sensation on the surface of her skin. Of course, this burning sensation was not caused by any actual injuries, but the effect of the laws of law contained in the other party's gaze. It was obvious that the other party had an understanding of the laws of fire, and when his gaze landed on Lorcy, he could make the laws of fire appear on the surface of her body. This was the most direct manifestation of Grimm having completed the elemental conversion of his spiritual force. Faced with the grade 2 Magus hand, Lorcy wanted to reject it, but under the immense pressure of the other party's spiritual force, she only felt her body go numb and warm before she fainted. When she regained consciousness, the other party had already wrapped his arms around her waist and was walking towards the small building behind her. Lorcy's face suddenly revealed a sinister smile, and she planned to use the agility unique to vampires to break free from the other party's grasp. However, the moment she activated the blood energy in her body, a warm current flowed from the other party's palm into her body. The blood-type energy that had just been condensed was smashed into pieces, and it was utterly defeated. An enormous amount of gentle fire elemental energy quickly flowed through her body, releasing countless strange runes that tightly confined Lorcy's heart core, sea of consciousness, inner palace, and other energy nodes. As a result, Lorcy, who had been stubborn and unyielding, immediately became as gentle as water, half of her body leaning on Grimm. Her expression was languid, and her beautiful eyes were tightly shut, as if she did not even have the strength to move a finger. At this moment, if not for the support of the other party's strange energy, Lorcy, whose blood energy had been severed into several pieces, would have fallen into his embrace. It was only when Grimm entered the main building with Lorcy in his arms that the group of nobles that had surrounded him broke free from the most terrifying mental nightmare. A few of the more mentally strong ones were sweating profusely, their legs trembling, and looked as if they were about to collapse. As for those who were mentally weak, as soon as they broke free from the mental nightmare, they ran around in fear, waving their hands and screaming. Lester witnessed everything from the third floor of the main building. Naturally, he also felt how powerful and terrifying the other party's mental strength was. Therefore, when Grimm entered the main building, he immediately lowered his head and whispered a few words, quickly assigning tasks to the outer members of his family. Therefore, when Grimm carried Lorcy up the stairs to the third floor, those who had lost their minds had already been taken away. The banquet below had also returned to normal. Those who were qualified to attend the banquet were naturally people who knew what was going on. When the banquet host did not say anything, they would continue to laugh and laugh as if nothing had happened. However, when they were chatting or dancing to their heart's content, they would unconsciously shift their gaze to the three-story building. Maybe something big that they did not know was slowly brewing there. When Grimm was led into the guest hall on the third floor by a well-mannered young nobleman, the Tier 2 vampire Count Lester Vick was already waiting for him. Welcome to my humble family's Rose Manor. Welcome to my humble family's Rose Manor. May I have the honor of knowing your name? Lester's face was full of smiles, and his eyes were filled with enthusiasm. He ignored the female vampire who was clinging to Grimm's body. At this moment, only Lester, Grimm, and Lorcy were left in the guest hall. The vampire who led the way had already closed the door and left. Grimm. Chapter 556. Grimm? As Lester sat down with Grimm, he quickly searched for this name in his mind. With the powerful spiritual force of a magus, almost all of them had a photographic memory. This was especially true for a person with a unique appearance like Grimm. If they had met in the past, it would be impossible for them to forget him. However, no matter how hard he tried, he could not recall anything. This meant that this was the first time they had met. The smile on Lester's face froze for a moment before returning to normal. Sir Grimm, may I know why you have come to our family's Rose Manor? Facing a magus of the same rank, even with Lester's arrogance, he did not dare to be rude. A Tier 2 sorcerer was an influential figure in any family. Even with the Vick family's background and strength, they did not dare to provoke a Tier 2 magus. I believe you already know why I am here, sir. Grimm smiled and loosened his grip on Loltha's waist. Haven't you been waiting for me to come? As soon as Grimm's hand left Lorcie's body, the energy shackles in her body dissipated. However, due to Grimm's imposing manner, Lorcie did not dare to move even a little, even though she was free. She could feel that this mysterious Tier 2 Magus was not a kind guest, and there seemed to be some kind of conflict between him and Lester. If she did not know what was good for her and moved, it was very likely that she would start a fight between the two magi. Although she thought highly of herself, if she was caught between two terrifying Tier 2 magi, it would be difficult for her to escape if they really started a fight. Lester's expression froze, and he could not help but feel a bad premonition in his heart. You mean that female vampire? Although he had expected this, when he saw Grimm slightly nod his head, he could not help but become serious. That female vampire had appeared out of nowhere, and after being captured, she did not say a word, not even telling him her name. Thus, Lester had used his family's channels to investigate her identity. But what he didn't expect was that before he could find out the identity of the other party, the mastermind behind the other party had already taken the initiative to reveal himself. Ross, I have something to discuss with this wizard Grimm. You can leave for now. Lester squinted his eyes and said in a low voice. The female vampire's body trembled, and her scarlet eyes shifted to Grimm, not daring to move. Sir Lester is right. We do have something to discuss. Beauty, you should leave first. Grimm suddenly smiled and patted the female vampire's buttocks. Lorcie immediately heaved a sigh of relief. She rolled her eyes at Grimm and left the living room, swaying her hips. Seeing that Lorcie had left, Lester's stern gaze finally loosened a little. At least he wasn't despicable enough to kidnap Lorcie, and this won Lester's good impression of him. Although the other party wouldn't be able to threaten him in the slightest by kidnapping Lorcie, the fact that the other party was willing to give up this advantage of his own accord still caused the tense atmosphere to relax a little. Sir Grimm, you should know, spying on someone else's bloodline is a big taboo. Although his expression was a little better, Lester's tone was still the same. I don't care what method you use to steal my bloodline. I have to take it back now. That female vampire had his bloodline. If he allowed her to grow on her own, it was almost certain that she would suffer a bloodline backlash. So Lester suppressed the anger in his heart and coldly rejected Grimm's unreasonable request. Sir Lester, don't forget what you did to the Cerubo family 90 years ago. Grimm immediately replied in an unfriendly tone. 90 years ago, the Cerubo family? Lester's eyes lit up as he received this information. He immediately understood the reason behind the whole thing. 90 years ago, he was still a grade 1 vampire who had just advanced to the next rank not long ago. In order to purify his bloodline, he had no choice but to find a secret place outside of his family to quietly study the vampire bloodline. In the Cerubo family's territory, he had hidden his identity and bought an old castle, secretly doing some secret research that he didn't want his family to know about. Unfortunately, just as he had some progress in his research, he was stopped by the other party because he had kidnapped a Cerubo family's apprentice to conduct experiments. Both sides fought a bloody battle. Lester escaped successfully, but the laboratory he had left under the castle was destroyed in an instant. He originally thought that the blood samples he had left there had been destroyed, but now it seemed that they had fallen into the hands of the Cerubo family. This way, the source of the female vampire's blood was clear. The Cerubo family was quite resourceful. They had only used part of their own blood source to successfully create a female vampire, and they had even trained her to such an outstanding level. This made Lester exclaim in admiration. But this way, both sides became awkward. Lester had casually entered the Cerubo family's territory to set up a laboratory, and he had even kidnapped the Cerubo family's apprentice as a test subject. If this news spread to the Scattered Tower Forest Sorcerer Association, he would probably be criticized. However, with his current status as a rank 2 vampire wizard, even if the old men of the Scattered Tower Forest wanted to interfere, they would only ask for compensation. He could still afford to make such a mistake. Of course, if he was not a rank 2 vampire, but a rank 1 vampire, then it would not be a mistake, but a crime. On the contrary, The Cerubo family had used his blood source to create a female vampire. This would not be able to escape the crime of spying on the Vic family's bloodline secrets. So if both sides were to argue, they would be evenly matched, and neither side would be able to suppress the other. However, now that the female vampire was in Lester's hands, overall, he had an obvious advantage. After explaining the situation in a few words, both sides could not help but frown. Grimm was thinking about the probability of Lester giving up on Mary, while Lester was thinking about the reason why Lester wanted the female vampire. The female vampire's potential was indeed outstanding, and she had the possibility of advancing to rank 2. But it was only a possibility. Would the other party risk the wrath of a Tier 2 vampire just because of this possibility? As if sensing Lester's doubts, Grimm finally revealed the truth. Sir Lester, to tell you the truth, the Mary you've detained is my lover. I will not give her up for any benefits. After listening to Grimm's righteous confession, Lester finally realized the seriousness of the situation. Just like how Lester would not give up on Mary, he also had a reason not to let Mary go. Thus, there seemed to be no room for negotiation between the two of them. As if sensing the determination in each other's eyes, Lester and Grimm's expressions became more and more serious. Unknowingly, a cold and dignified killing intent began to emerge. The atmosphere in the hall froze for only half a second. It was unknown which of the two had the murderous intent, but at the same time, the two rank 2 sorcerers erupted. The living room was not big. Both of them were only 5 to 6 meters away from each other, and there was a sturdy oak table between them. However, in the blink of an eye, the oak table shattered into pieces and flew towards Grimm's head. Lester's ghost-like figure instantly closed in on Grimm. Lester waved his hands quickly, and his sharp nails were like sharp blades, piercing into Grimm's body with a thick, bloody aura. As soon as the attack was formed, and before he could see its effect, Lester felt a surging stream of flames rushing towards him, and his instincts changed. His nails pierced half an inch into Grimm's body. If he had a tenth of his fingers, he was confident that he could pierce a few holes in Grimm's body. However, the pressing sense of danger made him give up on this opportunity, and he flashed away from Grimm's side. In the next second, a raging firestorm swept out from Grimm's body, and in an instant, the entire living room was engulfed in a sea of fire. Asterisk BTBTD. Asterisk as the terrifying flames surged and churned, Grimm's black suit was torn apart, and 7 or 8 bone-deep blood gushed out of his wounds. Before the blood could even reach the ground, it was instantly vaporized by the high temperature. At the same time, the destruction flame wizard staff appeared in Grimm's left hand. With a slight shake, an even larger and more terrifying fire barrier shot out, enveloping the entire 3-story building in an instant. The terrifying flames and terrifyingly high temperature engulfed the entire banquet hall at the same time. The ordinary people who were not protected by any spells did not even have the chance to make a sound before they were instantly turned into ashes. As for the members of the Vic family, they all emitted a thick, bloody mist from their bodies, protecting themselves as they tried their best to escape from the fire barrier. As for the vampires and blood thralls below the rank of Viscount, they did not even have time to escape from the fire barrier before their blood energy was depleted and they were burned to ashes. In the banquet hall, there were originally 300 to 400 people who were laughing and chatting, but in an instant, only 3 to 4 people managed to struggle out of the Rose Manor. As for the others, they were all turned into a pile of dust in the terrifying sea of fire. Chapter 557. Beep. Damage has been detected on the body's surface. Damage has reached 43%. Urgent treatment is recommended. Beep. Traces of blood elemental energy detected on the wound. Energy needs to be neutralized before emergency treatment. Beep. Blood loss continues. Blood loss has reached 1%. Energy loss has reached 2%. Energy loss has reached 2%. Beep. Host flame barrier has been activated. High temperature domain has been activated. Burning domain is being formed. Beep. Host's energy strength is increasing. Force field has been distorted. Calculating the distortion rate. A series of chip prompts flashed through Grimm's mind. He only skimmed through most of the data and did not do much to intervene. At the same time, he calmly waited for the chip's calculation of the distortion in the force field around him. For Tier 2 sorcerers like them, the energy attacks they could inflict were between 200 to 300 degrees. For a rank 1 magus, this was a terrifying height that they would never be able to reach. Due to the elemental energy in their bodies being too strong, the combination of their spiritual force and magic power caused the force field around them to constantly distort. In such an environment, any magus eyes or spiritual force would experience a slight deviation. The degree of deviation would also depend on the strength of the two magi. If a magus trusted his eyes too much and attacked according to what he saw, he would be shocked to find that his attacks would never match up with what he expected. The target he wanted to attack would never be in the position he had set for himself. This was the result of the distortion in the force field. Under normal circumstances, the distortion in the force field would not be too excessive and would not affect a battle between high-ranked magi. However, when two evenly matched magi were fighting, this small change could be exploited by one side and become the key to turning the situation around. At the start of the battle, before Grimm could unleash his strength, Lester had already used his agility to launch a sneak attack. Even though this amount of damage wasn't considered serious for a Grade 2 fire wizard, it wasn't a good sign that he had lost 72% of his blood and 20% to 15% of his energy at the beginning of the battle. Grimm stood in the air, his body completely enveloped by the elemental flames that were spewing out from his body. The violent and ferocious elemental flames were boiling. Grimm's body had turned almost white, almost transparent. He had completely turned into a terrifying, flaming man. The small wounds on the surface of his body quickly healed under the repair of the flame energy, but the blood he lost was difficult to recover in a short period of time. Opposite of Grimm, a pair of gray, leathery bat wings extended from Lester's back. There were sharp spikes at the ends of the wings. Relying on this pair of bat wings, Lester floated above the sea of fire. It stuck out its long, scarlet tongue and licked the boiling blood that remained between its fingers. That's right. As Grimm's flame energy erupted, the blood that had been separated from his body became scalding hot, and the temperature increased. When he licked it with his tongue, he felt as if he was licking boiling lava. Even though the temperature of the blood had already reached 700 degrees, Lester still squinted his eyes and licked it without hesitation. When the crimson blood was sucked into his body, Lester even raised his head and moaned in happiness and pain. Beep. Abnormal loss of energy detected. Initial estimation, 1%. 16%. The prompt from the AI, chip in Grimm's mind, caused his expression to change. The vampire in front of him could actually absorb the elemental energy in his body through the blood that had been separated from his body. This, although it was unimaginable, it was not surprising when one considered the powerful bloodline of the vampires. Asterisk tong, tong, tong. Asterisk following a series of explosions, a large amount of flame energy gathered in front of Grimm, condensing into a flaming shield with countless flaming runes. The solidified flames intertwined with the swirling flames, quickly revolving around Grimm's body. At the same time, two more massive and sturdy lava shields were rapidly forming around the fire shield. With lava as the base, flames as the binder, and flame runes swirling on both sides of the shield, the lava flowing on both sides of the shield and the flames lingering around it gave off a solemn and heavy feeling. As the defensive fire spells took shape, Grimm was protected by layers and layers of dense shields. It was no longer easy for Lester to get close to him. Looking at Grimm, who had completed his personal shield not far away, even with Lester's arrogance, he could not help but feel his scalp go numb. Any of the shields around Grimm's body would not be able to withstand a single swipe from Lester's sharp claws. But there were so many of them. If Lester's attack was blocked by these shields, it would give the fire wizard enough time to chant incantations and cast spells. Even with Lester's strength, it would be difficult for him to withstand a violent attack from a rank 2 fire wizard if he was entangled by the shields. Even among the talented sorcerers, elemental sorcerers had always been known for their strong offense but weak defense. If they were allowed to unleash their full power, no sorcerer of the same rank could withstand their unbridled firepower. Elemental sorcerers were indeed strong in offense, but weak in defense. However, their weakness was relative. For someone like Lester, who was known for his speed and agility, but weak in offense, it would be difficult for him to break Grimm's shields with his ghost-like movements and get close to Grimm. It would be much better if Lester was a physique refinery sorcerer with high elemental resistance. Since both sides had shed all pretense of cordiality, there was nothing else to worry about. Grimm, who was hovering in mid-air, instantly turned into a terrifying human-shaped, self-propelled cannon. Streaks of powerful fire spells swept towards Lester like a storm. Meanwhile, Lester flapped his huge bat wings and moved nimbly between the fire waves. From time to time, he would get close to Grimm's side and smash or scratch the fire shield around his body. With Lester's high agility and nimbleness, even if Grimm tried his best to lock onto his position, his fire spells would still miss most of the time. Even if Lester managed to hit his target, he would use a special method to dodge away from the center of the explosion and only have to endure the shockwaves from the spells. However, with the recoil of the fire shield and the burning effect of the fire barrier, Lester could not attack without taking any damage. Every second that he swam around Grimm's body, he had to endure the burning of the omnipresent flames. However, with the protection of the blood mist, he could easily endure the intense fire damage. If Grimm, who was hovering in mid-air, was a rampaging machine gun, then Lester would be a gray bat that wandered around the edge of the cannon's muzzle. He made use of the gaps between Grimm's attacks and tried his best to break the dense fire shield around Grimm's body. However, at the same time, he had to be extra careful to avoid being burned by the violent flames if he could not dodge in time. A lava ball of 220 degrees Celsius could not kill him. However, once his body was frozen by the lava ball, it would not be easy for him to escape the next baptism of flames. Lester originally wanted to use his swift movements to attract Grimm's full firepower and wait for Grimm to consume more than half of his energy before launching a counterattack. However, when the two of them fought above the Rose Manor and turned the entire manor into a sea of fire, Lester was surprised to find that Grimm's firepower was still as fierce as before. There was no sign of him running out of energy. It was as if Grimm was not worried about running out of energy at all. Damn it, damn it, damn it. This was a wizard who had completed elemental conversion of both his body and spirit. He must have condensed the corresponding elemental core in his body. Facing an elemental wizard who had a small energy pool, normal tactics would be useless. Unless Lester could increase the intensity of the battle by 2 levels, it would be a joke to think of exhausting Grimm's elemental energy. While Lester was worrying about Grimm, Grimm was also frowning and thinking hard. Lester could not attack Grimm through the dense elemental shields, and Grimm's violent fire spells could not catch up with Grimm's swift and agile figure. After half an hour, Grimm's fire spells had completely plowed the ground under his feet, but the damage he had done to the vampire could be counted on one hand. Trying to make the other party yield with just this amount of damage was simply a fantasy. As a Tier 2 wizard, when Grimm fought with all his might, even though he had the upper hand 99% of the time, the advantage he had was negligible. He had to use all his strength to chase after Grimm's figure. If he let his guard down, he might be ambushed by Grimm. Every time this happened, it meant that he would lose 2 or 3 of his fire shields. In comparison, although the lava shield's defense was better, it was not as flexible as the fire shield in terms of movement and blocking. Once the fire shields were depleted, the 2 lava shields would not be able to stop Grimm's sneak attack. The 2 Tier 2 wizards were locked in a stalemate in midair. The violent and ferocious fire spells had changed the terrain beneath them. The once beautiful and tranquil Rose Manor was now in ruins. All the buildings that stood on the ground collapsed in the fireballs and sea of fire that fell from the sky. All the plants and flower beds were incinerated by the monstrous flames, leaving black marks on the ground. Chapter 558. The Rose Manor was one of the Vic family's properties, and its defensive capabilities could not compare to the ancient Blood Castle. When the two Tier 2 sorcerers unscrupulously swept through the manor, all the buildings here suffered devastating damage and were trampled under their feet. When the buildings and wooden houses on the surface collapsed and were destroyed in the raging inferno, some of the hidden underground areas of the manor were inevitably affected. The Blood Prison. This was one of the most common places for vampire families. The purpose of its existence was to imprison low-ranked vampires who had made mistakes. As vampires, they naturally knew the strengths and weaknesses of other vampires. Hence, the facilities here were more targeted and, at the same time, more bloody and cruel. Vampires used blood as a carrier and energy source. Once they lost more than half of their blood, their strength would be greatly reduced. Apart from being used to imprison vampires, the Blood Prison was also a terrifying torture chamber. Mary, who had been captured, was now suspended above a huge wooden barrel. 7 or 8 silver chains as thick as a thumb pierced through her shoulder blades, collarbone, ribs, wrists, and ankles, firmly fixing her in midair. As magical silver was indescribably destructive to a vampire's body, the wounds inflicted by the silver chains would never heal by themselves. The coarse chains rubbed against Mary's wounds until they were a bloody mess. Scarlet blood continuously flowed from her wounds, dripping into the large barrel beneath her. The barrel was so large that it could easily fit 3 Marys. However, as the blood continued to drip down, it actually seemed like it was about to fill up. The 2 vampire barons in the Blood Prison were in charge of Mary's imprisonment. As low-ranked vampires, they were overjoyed to see a high-ranked Viscount suffer in front of them. They did not hesitate to express their joy through words and actions. As Mary was a spoil of war, personally delivered by the Tier 2 Duke, they did not dare to secretly take a sip of the blood, even though the barrel was about to overflow. On the other hand, Mary was wearing red armor, red boots, and long red hair. Even though she had been tortured by the silver chains to the point that she did not look like a human, her impressive figure and beautiful face were still very shocking from afar. No matter how talented she was, a foreign vampire who could threaten the Count had to be eliminated as soon as possible. Since Mary had fallen into Sir Leicester's hands, it was almost impossible for her to leave the Blood Prison alive. Therefore, the 2 male Baron vampires, who were only at the level of a prospective sorcerer, walked around Mary all day long, cursing her with the most vicious language. From time to time, they would also look at Mary's body with greedy and passionate eyes. And their greatest pleasure was to pull those silver chains from time to time, letting them rub against Mary's flesh, grinding the surrounding bones and flesh into a bloody mess, making the blood flow more cheerfully. However, it was a pity that no matter how much they tortured her for fun, Mary clenched her teeth and refused to make a sound. For the first 2 days, Mary would glare at them angrily with her scarlet eyes. But these few days, as the blood in her body almost dried up, her body and strength had weakened to the point that she didn't even have the strength to open her eyes. But today, a series of horrifying shockwaves suddenly came from a manor above the Blood Prison. The entire Rose Manor seemed to have been thrown into a meat grinder. The tremors caused the buildings to collapse and the ground to crack. The Blood Prison, which was located underground, was unavoidably affected. Rays of witchcraft light shone on the radiant green stone walls that were covered in moss and dark spots, forming a tight protective force field that blocked the witchcraft attacks that came from the sky. If it wasn't for the protection of the witchcraft of the Blood Prison, the 2 Baron vampires hiding inside would not have been able to withstand the burning of Grimm's flame barrier. They would have long been burned to ashes. The 2 vampires guarding Mary didn't know what was going on, so they quickly took out their communication wands and tried to contact their companions outside. Unfortunately, They tried many times, but there was no response. Even Viscount Inchia, who was in charge of the entire Rose Manor, was out of the question. Of course, they didn't even dare to think about opening the Blood Prison's protection to take a look. Even a high-level facility like the Blood Prison had been ravaged by the mysterious power to such an extent. One could easily imagine what would happen to the buildings outside. For the sake of their own lives, it was better to hide here and wait until it was safe outside before going out. However, just when the two vampire barons were at a loss of what to do, Mary, who was suspended in the air, suddenly opened her blood-red eyes. Her weak eyes faintly revealed a fierce and cold, murderous intent. Just now, when the strong shock waves swept through the Blood Prison, although most of the shock waves were absorbed and blocked by the Blood Prison's protection, the power that penetrated through was not to be underestimated. At least, the ends of the silver chains that fixed her to the surrounding walls had loosened. At this moment, Mary was extremely weak. Her strength was even weaker than that of a 4- or 5-year-old child. But a ruthless urge from the bottom of her heart urged her. This might be her only chance to escape. The loosening of the silver chains allowed her body, which had been stretched into a sprawl, to have some space to move around. Mary endured the pain from the friction of the silver chains in her body and pulled her left hand back. Then, she opened her mouth and used her sharp teeth to bite off half of her wrist. Only then did her left hand break free from the silver chains. After biting her left hand, she bit her right hand. Where her hands broke free, she rested for a while. Originally, most of her hands had been cut off. Only a small part of her skin and bones were left. Without the restraints of the silver chains and the continuous loss of blood, the powerful recovery ability of the vampire race was undoubtedly displayed. Then, she used her hands to break her shoulder blade and collarbone, and slowly pulled out the silver chains from her body. This process was undoubtedly comparable to the most terrifying, bloody, and cruel torture in the world. But Mary gritted her teeth and endured it, not even making a sound, until the last silver chain was slowly pulled out from her body. The moment the chains left her body, Mary's blood energy that had been cut off was once again integrated and flowed throughout her body. She could not help but let out a soft hum of happiness from the comfortable feeling. Hearing the sound, the two vampire barons suddenly turned their heads and saw a free female vampire who had broken free from the silver chains. "Quick, hurry up. She has just broken free and has not recovered her strength. We still have a chance." One of the older vampire could not help but whisper. Two swift figures immediately pounced on Mary. Mary raised her pretty face and sneered. Her whole body suddenly sank, and she actually plunged into the bucket of blood below her. Amid the ripples of blood, Mary instantly submerged into the blood water. In the next second, an unstoppable and powerful blood energy exploded in the Blood Prison. The two vampires who were halfway to pounce were caught off guard and were immediately splashed by the blood water. If it was any other time in the past, the blood water that contained the target's life energy would be the most nourishing and fastest healing medicine for the vampires. But today, the blood water suddenly seemed to have a life of its own. Not only could they not absorb it, but it corroded their bodies and made them feel dull pain. The two low-level vampires stopped in their tracks in shock and looked down at their bodies. They were horrified to find that the blood water was alive. The blood that splashed on their bodies seemed to have its own intelligence. It gathered into a ball of blood and kept twisting and changing shape. Countless thin thorns of different lengths emerged from the ball of blood and fiercely pierced the surface of the vampire's skin. They were like small blood-type monsters that continuously created wounds for the vampires. Some even drilled into their skin and stirred up trouble inside their bodies, destroying everything that could be destroyed. As the two vampire barons wailed in pain, the huge vats of blood exploded with a bang. In the blood mist that filled the sky, a tall figure with huge bat wings on her back was faintly discernible. She roared at the sky. After Mary vented the anger in her body with a series of crazy roars, she retracted her bat wings, and the blood mist and the blood prison returned to her body like tired birds returning to the forest. At this moment, Not only did she absorb all the blood in the bucket of blood back in her body, but even the blood of the two vampire barons gushed out like a broken dam and was directly absorbed by her. A moment later, the two withered corpses that had their blood drained fell to the ground. Their skin was cracked and wrinkled like the bark of a 1,000-year-old tree. There was not a single drop of water in them. Their life energy flowed into Mary's body along with the last drop of blood. After dealing with these two small fries, Mary flapped her bat wings, and her whole body turned into a meteor wrapped in blood mist. She instantly broke through the ceiling of the blood prison and slowly rose into the sky while flapping her bat wings in the sea of fire. Mary's sudden appearance immediately attracted the attention of the two Tier 2 wizards who were fighting. Vampire Earl Lester and Fire Shaman Grimm had completely different expressions when they saw Mary. One was shocked, while the other was delighted. Count Lester's expression changed drastically. With a sway of his body, he pounced towards Mary. While pouncing towards her, he shouted loudly, "Come here!" As the blood-red rune appeared on Lester's forehead, Mary's consciousness became dizzy. Her whole body unconsciously flapped her wings and flew towards Lester. However, at this moment, a huge ring of flames exploded between Mary and Lester. Grimm, who had seized the opportunity, blocked Mary with a precise flame jump and put Lester behind him. Mary clenched her teeth and used all her strength to not attack Grimm. In her vampire bloodline that flowed through her body, a mysterious force called out to her, tempting her. It wanted her to submit to the great Master Lester and use all her body, mind, and strength to serve him. However, this instinct of her bloodline was in serious conflict with her main body's consciousness. She could only moan and fall into Grimm's arms. Although Mary had recovered most of her strength by absorbing blood, there were still traces of torture on her body. Grimm scanned her with his spiritual force and roughly saw her condition. His heart was filled with endless pity. "Very good. You are very good." Grimm looked at Lester with a cold gaze. "Today's matter has come to an end. We will talk about the rest later." Lester took a step forward and replied in the same cold tone, "You think you can escape punishment just because you saved her? Don't underestimate the Vick family strength. Next time, you might have to kneel and beg me to forgive you for today's crime." Chapter 559. The Blazing Flame Monarch. The return of Grimm and Mary did not attract anyone's attention. Most of the wizards of the Wizard's Pagoda did not even know when the two of them had left. Some of the less informed ones still stubbornly believed that Grimm had locked himself in the upper levels of the Wizard's Pagoda to slowly stabilize his spiritual force after reaching level 2. What they did not know was that the Wizards of Grimm's faction had already completed a dimensional expedition. The leader of the faction, Grimm, had even fought a vampire wizard of the same level. Of course, the aftermath of the battle had not disappeared. To put it bluntly, the aftermath of the battle between two Grade 2 wizards destroying the Rose Manor had only just begun, and the severe consequences would only get worse in the next few months. The Rose Manor was the private property of the Vick family, and it had already been razed to the ground. The number of nobles and servants who had died numbered 400 to 500. Although wizards usually did not care about the lives of these worldly agents, it was a different story when it concerned the reputation and glory of the family. Regardless of whether the Vick family took revenge in private or caused a ruckus in the scattered wizard association of the Tower Forest, Grimm would not be at peace. He would likely be condemned and suppressed by various factions. If it did not handle this properly, Grimm's faction that had just formed might come to a premature end. Even he himself might not be able to establish a foothold in the scattered Tower Forest region. Of course, how this matter would develop would depend on the attitude of the Cerubo family. If the Cerubo family was willing to step forward and take responsibility for this matter, the Vick family would not be too ruthless out of respect for the Grade 6 Great Wizard. When the time came, Grimm would be able to get through this crisis safely, be it compensation of magical crystals or resources. However, considering Grimm's current relationship with the Cerubo family, It was almost impossible for the Cerubo family to step forward. Grimm even had to be careful that the Cerubo family would use this matter to kick him while he was down. Hence, after bringing Mary back to the Blazing Flame Monarch, the first thing Grimm considered was how to strengthen his faction. Third level of the Blazing Flame Monarch. After many years of operation, the magic facilities here were completely complete. A sealing room, a library, a golem factory, an alchemy laboratory, a scroll production room. As long as it was a magic facility that wizards could use, it had everything here. Originally, these magic facilities were open to the public, and some of them had even been handed over to the magi stationed in the tower and the resident magi to manage and use them. However, in the past half a month, the Blazing Flame Monarch's butler, Garg, had suddenly taken back his authority to manage the sealing room and began to reject all non-core magi's requests. Fortunately, the use of a sealing room was very limited. Wizards might not even use it once in 8 to 10 years. Therefore, this small inconvenience did not bring too much trouble to the resident wizard. However, there were still some magi who could guess that the Blazing Flame Monarch's management was in a hurry to retract the authority to manage the sealed room. It was very likely that they wanted to seal and imprison some sensitive or powerful otherworld beings, or else they wouldn't have been in such a rush. The upper echelons of the Blazing Flame Monarch were indifferent to these rumors and did not pay any attention to them. Strictly speaking, there were only 6 core magi who knew what kind of otherworld creature was imprisoned in the third level of the Blazing Flame Monarch sealed room. 2 of them were in the plane of the goblins, while the other 2 were in the far north. Within the Blazing Flame Monarch, only Grimm and Gargamel knew the inside story. Even the forest demon Ava. Without Grimm's approval, Gargamel didn't dare to tell her about it. After returning from the Rose Manor, Grimm brought Mary back to the Blazing Flame Monarch's first stop, which was the sealing room in the third level of the Wizard's Pagoda. After going through a series of tightly guarded secret doors and layers of witchcraft verification, Grimm finally used his authority as the Tower Master to open the door of the sealed room. He then brought Mary into this mysterious place. The sealing room sounded like a mysterious place, but in essence, it was just an ordinary room covered in graphite lines and inscribed with countless protective runes. It was protected by many mysterious barriers. There were many different layers of seals in the sealing room, and their prices varied according to the level of the seals. Through the ingenious design of magical geometry, the sealing room could effectively block the probing of any prophecy-type wizard spells. Anyone who wanted to use wizard spells or magical items to probe the room would have to obtain permission from the owner of the Wizard's Pagoda. Otherwise, they would have to deal with the countless anti-detection spell formations. Furthermore, there was a perfect sealing binding spell formation within the sealing room that could borrow the power of the Wizard's Pagoda to seal terrifying magical beasts or powerful otherworld creatures that could not be dealt with at the moment. Thus, the sealing room became Grimm's temporary prison for the level 3 lightning dragon arms and level 2 draconian Zacha. When Grimm and Mary stepped into the mysterious sealing room, they saw 2 pillars of light of different colors, one large and one small. The larger pillar of light sealed a terrifying lightning dragon that was 17 meters long, its body covered in dense azure scales. Rune chains that seemed to have substance appeared out of thin air, wrapping around the lightning dragon's massive body. Under the combined suppression of the runic chains and plane of existence, the Thunder Dragon, which had the strength of a Tier 3 monster, could not budge an inch. It could only close its eyes and use its powerful willpower to resist the plane of existence's laws. Beneath its body, a glowing wizard dagger was stuck between its chest and abdomen. Viscous dragon blood infused with the law of lightning flowed down the dagger, slowly dripping into a clay jar beneath the lightning dragon's body. Outside the pillar of light, similar clay jars were piled up, reaching a height of over 2 meters. There were 7 or 8 jars filled with dragon blood that had their openings sealed. At the other end of the sealing room, within a smaller pillar of light, The level 2 draconian Zacha, who was bound by rune chains and unable to move, silently looked at Grimm with a complicated expression. Grimm would never give anyone the authority to enter and exit such an important place. Even the Flame Monarch's butler, Gargamel, would not be able to enter and leave as he pleased. Hence, in order to take care of the lightning dragon, Grimm had transferred the engineering support magic puppet from his laboratory here to be in charge of producing dragon blood. Without Grimm's guidance, Mary's scarlet eyes stared unblinkingly at the lightning dragon arms. No, to be more precise, she was staring at the dragon blood flowing happily beneath the lightning dragon's body. Go, drink to your heart's content. I'm sure this feast of dragon blood will make up for the deficit you've had for the past few days. With Grimm's permission, Mary instantly transformed into a hungry ghost that had been thirsty for 1,000 years. She flashed into the pillar of light and lay on the lightning dragon's wound, gulping down the viscous dragon blood in large mouthfuls. Her unbridled actions had infuriated the thunder dragon arms. However, as soon as the lightning energy within its body began to gather, the runic chains within the pillar of light blossomed with countless mysterious runes. The power of thunder and lightning condensed within Lei Long's body was like a broken wine bottle, instantly leaking out cleanly. All the lightning energy was channeled into the mysterious space along the rune chains. With the lightning energy in its body gone, the lightning dragon that was about to raise its head and roar suddenly felt its limbs go limp. It could only lie on the ground in grief and indignation, unable to struggle at all. However, even if it could not retaliate openly, it still had some tricks up its sleeves. The viscous purple dragon blood had just been sucked into Mary's body. Before she could digest and absorb the surging life force within, the dragon blood exploded in her stomach. Although the lightning energy in the dragon's blood had left its body, it still maintained a faint connection with the rank 3 Thunder Dragon. Under Lei Long's command, the power of thunder and lightning within the dragon blood suddenly exploded, instantly blasting Mary's internal organs to pieces, turning her into a bloody mess. Many of her internal organs had turned into a bloody mess that was hard to identify. This kind of terrifying injury would be fatal to anyone who suffered it. However, to a vampire, it was only a moderate injury. As the powerful life energy within the dragon blood was absorbed into his body, his 5 viscera and 6 bowels, which had been smashed like a pile of mud, began to regrow under the drive of the strange laws. As the powerful life force continued to pour into her body, the newly regrown organs became even stronger and more resilient than before. However, not long after, following a series of lightning explosions, the newly regrown organs were once again destroyed by the lightning energy. However, this time, only a portion of them were destroyed. Some of the flesh and blood still remained. As such, as the dragon blood continued to pour into her body, Mary's body would occasionally be struck by lightning and thunder, each time causing her considerable damage. However, Mary, who had already made up her mind to eat her fill, was unmoved. She gritted her teeth and lay on the wound, devouring the dragon blood in large mouthfuls. As for the internal organs in her body, they were destroyed as soon as they were regenerated, only to be destroyed again. It was as if she had fallen into an endless cycle. The lightning energy in the dragon blood, which Mary could not endure, was released. She used this process of destruction and reconstruction to slowly convert the dragon blood's life force into her own bloodline energy. She had suffered unprecedented cruel torture in the Rose Manor. Although she had absorbed more than half of the origin blood, she had still lost a lot of power. Now, with the powerful Tier 3 Thunder Dragon blood, Mary was like a mouse that had fallen into a rice jar. The only thing she could do was eat, eat, eat. She ate until her stomach was full, until the power of the bloodline in her body was full, until the blood energy almost made her body explode. Only then did Mary let go of her mouth with difficulty and stop swallowing like her life depended on it. Chapter 560. Seeing Grim pick up Mary and turn around to leave, the rank 3 Thunder Dragon Arms, who had just lost a lot of blood, could no longer hold it in. "What do you want, human Magus?" Arms roared weakly. Ever since this despicable human Magus had captured the Thunder Dragon in the Goblin Plane, he had used a special Goblin teleportation device to transfer it to a higher plane. Although the rank 3 Thunder Dragon had never been to this plane, its keen sense of smell and plane perception allowed it to detect the strong aura of a Magus in the laws of this plane. Chaotic, evil, strange, and powerful. Although Magi liked to wear the title of erudition on their heads, when faced with a dragon that could easily live for thousands of years, their so-called erudition was nothing but a joke. Even in the multiverse, the inheritance of knowledge obtained by a dragon through its bloodline was considered top-notch knowledge. Regular beings would not even have the chance to learn from it. Ever since it was imprisoned in this cramped and lowly place, the Thunder Dragon Arms had pondered countless times on how to deal with the human Magus interrogation and torture. Being wise and far-sighted, it had even thought of a strategy to deal with it. However, to its astonishment, the human wizard only appeared once to seal it, and then left behind a hateful elemental puppet to continuously bleed it. There was no attempt to persuade it, nor was there any vicious coercion. It was as if the human Magus only treated it as a powerful resource point. Apart from letting it bleed, there was nothing else he could do. This undoubtedly caused the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon to become paranoid and paranoid. With the great strength of the dragon race, any human Magus who caught them would not be willing to cut them into pieces, only to obtain some insignificant dragon card resources. Dragon blood, dragon tendons, dragon meat, dragon bones, dragon crystals. Although these things were valuable, how could they compare to a living rank 3 dragon? Arms was confident that the human Magus was only using this to break its defenses. If the Thunder Dragon could no longer withstand the torture, the human Magus would take the opportunity to propose some frightening conditions. For example, the partner contract the secrets of the dragon race, or the knowledge of the dragon race, as a pure-blooded colossal dragon and the pride of the Thunder Dragon race. It absolutely couldn't accept any of the options above. Even if it faced death, it would never accept it. But if he didn't agree to the enemy's conditions and wanted them to release him unconditionally, the difficulty of such a negotiation was no less than the former. Therefore, after thinking about it, seeing that Grim was about to leave, the Thunder Dragon Arms, who thought himself to be calm, finally couldn't help but speak. Hearing the stubborn Thunder Dragon speak, Grim stopped in his tracks. "You can't give me what I want." "If you don't say it, how do you know that I can't give it to you? I want you." Grim looked at Arms and said straightforwardly, "Don't even think that the great bloodline of the Thunder Dragon will bow its head to a weak human, even if you're a wizard." Thunder Dragon Arms said without hesitation. "Then what's there to talk about?" Grim's lips curled up as he prepared to leave again. "Wait." Lightning Dragon Arms couldn't help but shout. It exerted a little force, and the rune chain immediately lit up with a series of runes. Armas instantly felt the pain of his flesh being burned. Lightning Dragon Arms hissed in pain, but he didn't dare to move his body at all. Only when the runes on the rune chain gradually extinguished did he slowly crawl out of the abyss of pain. Although I can't serve you, but I can use my servant as a substitute." It seemed that the counterattack from the spell just now had really hurt him. He couldn't even speak properly. Upon hearing this, Grim raised his eyebrows and turned to look at Dragon Man Zacha, who was in the other light pillar. When Zacha was first brought into the sealed room, he was in an indescribably miserable state. After being trapped underground for more than 10 days, it had already become the reserve rations of the Thunder Dragon's master. The flesh on the lower half of its body had almost been gnawed clean, and even the upper half of its body had been gnawed to a horrible state. When he first brought Zacha back, Grim wasn't even sure if he could save him. After all, this kind of injury was too unimaginable and terrifying. But it had to be said that the Dragonians were indeed half-dragons. Even with such a serious injury, with the help of Gargamel, who was a dabbler in alchemy, he was able to come back to life and even recover to the point where he was almost fully recovered. Originally, Grimm thought that Zacha would hate lightning dragon arms to the core and would easily surrender to him. But who would have thought that this grade 2 Dragonian Zacha was such a blockhead? No matter how Grimm and Gargamel instigated it, it didn't say a word, still obediently obeying Thunder Dragon Armstrong's every command. At this point, Grimm couldn't help but admit that the binding power of bloodlines on most creatures was far beyond his imagination. Originally, Grimm had given up on Zacha and had given up on the idea of subduing him. But who would have thought that Lightning Dragon Arm's words would give him a new glimmer of hope? Even though he was ecstatic, Grimm's cold and handsome face didn't show it. Instead, he sneered in disdain. "You're a grade 3 dragon, and now you want to use a grade 2 Dragonian to replace you. Do you think all magi are brainless fools?" Towards the end, Grimm's tone became harsh. Of course not. Of course not. A dignified giant dragon lord was actually being reprimanded by a mere human magus. If it was in the past, Lightning Dragon Arms would have spat out a mouthful of dragon breath and blasted him into nothingness. But now, he could only be careful and explain in a submissive tone. "I will give you a fortune that will satisfy you in exchange for my freedom." The fortune of the Dragon Clan? Hearing this, Grimm couldn't help but mutter to himself. Everyone in the multiverse knew that the Dragon Clan was very good at accumulating wealth. Every dragon would live with their parents when they were young, but once they matured, they would be chased out by their parents and forced to live on their own. The most direct reason behind this was not because the male or female dragon wanted them to be independent, but because they were afraid that they would covet the wealth they had painstakingly plundered. Hence, once a dragon matured, they would build a nest and plunder the wealth of other intelligent beings. Human cities, elven trees, dwarven castles, gnome crypts, even powerful magical creatures that were weaker than them would be plundered by the dragons. Gold, jewels, rare ores, divine weapons, magic gems, and all items that contain powerful elemental energy. These were the dragon's favorite targets to plunder and plunder. When the amount of wealth a dragon had plundered reached its limit, it would become increasingly lazy and cautious. It would spend all day in its nest, lying on top of its piles of treasures and sleeping soundly. During this period, dragons were the most unwilling to leave their nest, and they were also the most powerful. Hence, Grimm's heart palpitated at Arm's suggestion, and he looked at the lightning dragon suspiciously. "Arms, as far as I know, you're still a young dragon. Also, this invasion of the Goblin Plain seems to be the first time you've come out of your nest to plunder. Do you have any wealth in your nest?" Arm's expression crumbled at Leyland's words. It did not expect this young human magus to have such comprehensive information on it. It would be difficult to deceive Leyland now. I have some wealth in my nest." Arms felt like he had lost all face after lying to a lowly creature for the first time. "Is that enough to redeem a grade 3 dragon?" Grimm asked. For some reason, Lightning Dragon Arms was stammering as he said, It's definitely not enough, but as long as you let me go, I'll definitely borrow enough wealth from my clansmen to redeem myself." For some reason, Lightning Dragon Arms was stammering. "I've never heard of a dragon lending its wealth to its kin. Even the dragon's mate can't do that." Grimm no longer doubted Arms this time. He glared at Arms with a ferocious gaze. That's right. For the first time in its life, Arms hated Magi for being so knowledgeable. However, what it hated even more were those bastards from the Dragon Clan who spread the secrets of the Dragon Clan everywhere. In the face of the overbearing gaze of the Magus, even Arms, who had always prided himself on being noble and mighty, felt uneasy. "I can help you steal. I can help you borrow." The Lightning Dragon's tone finally softened. "You mean you're willing to work for me?" Grimm was elated. No, who would have thought that the Lightning Dragon would once again harden its resolve? According to the traditions of our race, pure-blooded dragons are not allowed to become companions, servants, or mounts of other races. If you go against this rule, you'll be spurned by the entire race and lose the protection of the dragon god. You mean, you can serve me, but you can't sign any slave contract? Grim asked tentatively after tasting it for a while. This time, the lightning dragon did not refuse, nor did it affirm his words. Instead, it stared at Grim with a complicated expression, not saying a word. Grim vaguely understood something. The faith and soul of a dragon would always belong to the great and holy dragon god. This was a bottom line that could never be violated. As long as he did not cross this line, Arms was willing to make some concessions to protect his life. Chapter 561. It was the time of the day when the sun was high up in the sky. The originally peaceful market in the vicinity of the blazing cavern suddenly became lively and clamorous. A group of adventurers who had just returned from hunting in the dark forest had luckily brought back 5-winged flying snake eggs. As a result, the market and camp were in a frenzy of bidding. 4 or 5 adventurers with bloodstains on their faces and bodies were joyfully waiting at the side of the auction platform. Every time the crowd around them raised the bid, they would cheer a little. A few trade representatives from various parts of the scattered tower forest were already arguing until their necks were red. They tore open their collars and continuously waved the bidding cards in their hands. The host chosen by the Blazing Flame Monarch was also an acolyte. Although he only had the strength of a high-ranked acolyte, he had an abundance of life experience that didn't match his age. However, the atmosphere today was just too enthusiastic. Even he couldn't help but feel his mouth go dry. However, just as he was yelling at the top of his lungs and preparing to strike the hammer, the scene before his eyes left him indescribably horrified, and he found it hard to control himself. In the distant horizon, a dark mass of figures rolled over like a dark cloud. They had been at the end of the horizon just a moment ago, but in the next moment, they had already arrived in the sky above the market with a deafening roar. Everyone in the market and camp came out of their tents or wooden houses, shielding their eyes with their hands as they silently sized up this group of uninvited fellows. However, when they clearly saw the appearance and attire of the newcomers, their expressions changed, and they began to feel apprehensive. The Vic family. These were all high-ranked vampire magi of the Vic family. There was no lack of veteran adventurers in the camp who had traveled extensively. With just a glance, they quickly recognized the origins of this group. In truth, there were only a few vampire families who wore noble attire and had large bat wings on their backs. It was difficult not to recognize them. Moreover, the vampire in the lead had a long and narrow face, a strong nose bridge, thin lips, and a pair of strange silver eyes that shone like the stars of the morning. He wore skinny trousers, a red jacket, and a black high-collar jacket. A black silk cloak with red edges fluttered behind him, giving off a deep impression. The patriarch of the Vic family, the rank 3 vampire Magus Hines? Vic someone quickly recognized this famous and powerful tier 3 vampire, exclaiming in surprise before quickly covering his mouth and sneaking out of the camp. A total of 13 vampires had arrived, and one of them was the current patriarch of the Vic family, Heinz Merlin. Vic. There were 2 grade 2 vampires, Lester, who had just advanced, and another veteran vampire, Tori. As for the rest, they were all core members of the Vic family. They were also Tier 1 Magi to outsiders. Accompanying them was a black-robed, cold-faced Tier 2 Magus. From the looks of it, it was Magus Forgan from the Solubo family. Such a group of fiendish vampires had descended upon the Blazing Flame Monarch in such a threatening manner. No matter how one looked at it, they didn't seem like guests at all. As a result, the smart Alex in the camp and the bazaar began to retreat to the periphery without a word, exposing the small auction stage and the host that they had surrounded so tightly that not even a drop of water could escape. "Are you someone from the wizard's pagoda below?" Hennis narrowed his eyes, his eerie silver pupils staring at the wizard apprentice. My lord, greetings. I'm Hua." With a ripping sound, a strange red light flashed. Hennis, who was high up in the air, grabbed at the air with his right hand. 5 deep claw marks appeared on the wizard apprentice's face. "I'm not interested in your name. I'm only asking if you're someone from the wizard's pagoda below. If I hear another word of nonsense, I'll crush you to death." A sinister expression appeared on Hennis' long, thin face. The wizard apprentice covered his face and screamed in pain, but when he heard Hennis' threat, he suppressed it and nodded, his body trembling as he said loudly, "Yes, I am." Hennis let out a satisfied, cold smile. "I'll give you 5 minutes to inform Grimm that the Vic family has come looking for him. Tell him to hand over that bitch quickly, then kowtow and admit his mistake. Otherwise, I'll bathe his wizard's pagoda in blood today." Hearing the high-pitched, ear-piercing roar of the level 3 vampire, the sorcerer apprentice was scared silly. He even forgot the sharp pain on his face. He opened his eyes wide in confusion, almost unable to believe his own ears. "The wound on your face has been poisoned by my blood poison. You only have 5 minutes left to live. Run faster or else." He. With the reminder, the wizard apprentice vaguely noticed the abnormality of the wound on his face. 5 minutes? How could 5 minutes be enough to pass through the flame cave to the lava hall, then enter the flame monarch's wizard's pagoda? But his own life was at stake, so the sorcerer apprentice couldn't care less about these things. He activated the agility-hastening spell on the ring on his little finger and poured the antidote into his mouth frantically. In the blink of an eye, he passed through the market and entered the flame cave. There's no way he'll make it to the wizard's pagoda alive, Wizard Forgan said coldly. His tone was so calm and cold that no one would realize he was talking about a matter related to life. A small fry like him doesn't even have the right to speak. If he didn't run so fast, he might be able to live for another 5 minutes. Now, he'll be a puddle of blood in 2 minutes. Hennis laughed coldly. There seems to be some movement underground. Lester, who had been standing respectfully behind Hennis, couldn't help but remind him. Ever since they arrived, a surging ball of elemental flames had begun to rumble 200 meters below their feet. It seemed like the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda had sensed their presence and began to extract the energy from the elemental pool to increase the defense of the Wizard's Pagoda. Seeing that these powerful wizards were here to cause trouble, the people in the campsite who were secretly observing immediately scattered like birds and beasts, fleeing into the forest in the distance. Even the vampires had no interest in slaughtering these normal people who relied on the Wizard's Pagoda to survive. Instead, it was the leader of the Vic family, Hennis, who was secretly preparing to escape with their spoils of war, who let out a soft gasp of surprise. Suddenly, the snake egg in the hands of the 5 magically flew into the sky as if it had grown wings and landed in Hennis' hands. Winged flying snake's egg? Hennis lifted his nose and sniffed, then casually broke the eggshell and sucked in the egg white. The energy aura isn't strong, but the smell is quite fresh. Here, take this magical crystal and leave. I'll be taking these snake eggs. In the next second, a sparkling magical crystal tumbled down from the sky and landed in front of the team of 5 adventurers. 5 eggs from a level 1 winged flying snake were only worth 1 magical crystal. The burly man's face turned red, and he wanted to step forward to argue, but he was dragged away by his teammates, whose expressions changed drastically. They picked up the magical crystal and slipped away without looking back. In an instant, the temporary campsite that could normally accommodate 400 to 500 people became a deserted area. The 13 vampires flapped their bat wings and landed lightly on the ground, while Hennis landed on a scarlet carpet spread out by his clansmen. In the next second, a black high-backed chair appeared behind him, and Hennis sat down gracefully. As soon as he opened his right hand, a glass of scarlet wine was handed to him. Hennis elegantly crossed his legs and brought the goblet to his nose. He gently sniffed the aroma of the scarlet wine as it vibrated. He slightly narrowed his silver eyes and quietly waited for the enemy to appear. A mere rank 2 fire magus was definitely not his match. The speed of a rank 3 vampire flying at full speed was not something an ordinary person could imagine. Even killing a rank 2 fire magus didn't take more than 3 seconds. Hennis even doubted whether the fire magus would be able to see his movements clearly before he died. Perhaps this would make the fire magus die too quickly, and there wouldn't be any pain. In that case, he would use the slowest movements to slowly crush him to death, and let him have a taste of how death befalls him. Just as the vampires were patiently waiting, a flaming door slowly opened in an empty space in front of the blazing flame cave. Two magi of completely different sizes walked out from within. Grim, behind Hennis. The newly promoted Lester recognized Grim at a glance, and could not help but call out his name hatefully. However, without the orders of the leader, he did not dare act on his own. Thus, he could only stare at the other party with bloodshot eyes. They were naturally the two leaders of the Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda, Grim and Gargamel. When the flaming door slowly dissipated, Gargamel raised his withered old face and carefully sized up the team in front of him. Although he already knew the origins and objectives of his enemies from within the Blazing Flame Monarch, he still felt his heart tremble when faced with such a powerful team without any obstructions. If not for the Blazing Flame Monarch casting a layer of mental protection on him from afar, Gargamel's teeth would have chattered and his legs would have gone limp, unable to suppress the fear in his heart. Compared to Gargamel, the rank 2 Grim was much more powerful. Relying on the protection of the Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda, Grim's body emitted a faint layer of fiery light. Within 10 miles of the Blazing Flame Monarch, any enemy that wanted to deal with him would have to first break through this layer of flame barrier. This was the exclusive benefit of Grim as the leader of the Wizard's Pagoda. Facing this group of powerful vampires that came uninvited, Grim's face showed no fear. Instead, he raised his head and greeted the familiar face in the sky. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.